Very good. Welcome to the channel, everybody. I've got a very special guest I'm really excited to speak with today, Dan Norton. He's a philosophy PhD. We're going to be discussing Ayn Rand. It's something that he does on his channel. In fact, his entire channel is built around Ayn Rand's philosophical models, ethics, politics, and uh, so I guess it would be objectivism, egoism, capitalism are kind of the primary focuses, I think. And I'll let him explain more about that when he introduces himself. I've had a chance to speak with Dan a couple of times now. He's come onto my channel as a guest and spoken with my audience, which is always appreciated. And I've been on his channel as well, and we've had some really great conversations. We'll get into what I'm sure today as well, because one of the things we're going to be talking about, something I discuss quite a bit, as everybody knows, is ethics and morality. And I recently, excuse me, I recently started looking into Ayn Rand after having met Dr. Norton, and came across his channel just randomly on YouTube. And I was like, oh, the Ayn Rand, this is interesting. And I had a really great talk with him for the first time. And then that, of course, got me looking into Ayn Rand's philosophy. And I do find it to be very interesting, but I don't know enough about it to really speak knowingly about it. But fortunately, I've got the expert here with us today. So we'll look into getting into that. One of the things I want to mention, and I think it's something that Dan and I have been really good about, and it's something I would encourage everybody to do or make a habit of, is when Dan and I have our conversations, we really focus on the definitions of the words that we're using, so that we're having a real clear path of communication. And we talked about, agnosticism versus atheism, and got into, God beliefs and things of that nature. And he and I spent, oh my goodness, maybe an hour just making sure we were hammering out, like, what is the universe? What is existence? What is everything? We talking about with different God concepts. What does God even mean and stuff? And it's really helpful. It does take an investment in time, but it's well worth it, because then you really understand, you're not talking past each other, because I see that happening so much in conversations with people, especially when you start getting into stuff like politics or religion, things that people are passionate about. They've got their own ideas in their head, their own definitions, their own meanings, and their own talking points. And that happens a lot in conversations, especially if people have them multiple times. You see it a lot on social media. People are used to just kind of repeating the same talking points, and they've got their own ideas of what these words are meaning. And the other person may be on a completely different page, so it really is helpful as you're going to have a productive conversation, to really take your time, listen to what your interlocutor is saying, and really focus on, okay, are we talking about the same thing? Do we have the same meaning to these words? And I really like how Dan and I have done that. It was a really great conversations that we've had. So let Dan introduce himself to the audience here, plug his channel real quick and everything. And of course, as always, I will be getting links to his channel in the description of this video once the video posts. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me as a guest. I definitely appreciate the opportunity. As Objective Ethics mentioned, I do have a channel on which I promote Ayn Rand's philosophy. She called it Objectivism. It's, in a nutshell, it's a philosophy of reason, egoism, and capitalism. And I also do a live stream. I currently do it once every 5 days. My next show will probably be either tomorrow or Monday or Tuesday, and usually starting around the same time. So I invite everyone to come by, check it out. I have a call-in line, so anyone can call in at any time. I also engage with my chat a lot. I take super chats. And I definitely appreciated having Objective Ethics here call into my show a couple times. We did have some good discussions, and he mentioned definitions. I do agree that's certainly an important part of having a constructive conversation, is making sure people are on the same page about how they're using their terms. And the very word objective is one of those terms which I think deserves a lot of attention, and maybe we'll get into that some today. I'll let him steer the conversation. It's his show, but just want to say thanks again for the invitation to be here.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have you. And I did probably forget to mention, as always, just so you guys know, I do open up the panel. Once Dan and I have had a chance to kind of have more of a linear conversation, at some point we will open up the panel. I never ask my guests to stay longer than they want to. I know that people's schedules can get busy and stuff like that, but as long as Dan can stay, I'd be very grateful. And anybody who wants to join the discussion, you're always welcome to. Once I open up the panel, I'll put a link in the chat, and you guys can jump on and we can discuss. If Dan is still here, you can ask him your questions directly. If you want to talk about something differently, I do pretty much leave it open for discussion. My only rule, as always, is we have to be respectful. I don't want open bigotry, things of this nature, hate speech or whatever they call it. I don't want to platform that kind of nonsense. There's just no need for that. But we could talk about anything. I don't think there's really any topics off the table, as long as we're willing to attack each other's ideas or promote each other's ideas. Frankly, it doesn't have to just be a conflict, but we just don't need to attack people, right? Or groups of people. I don't think that's appropriate. So as far as that goes. So Dan, I do have, of course, this great resource that you turned me on to, this lexicon here. So as we get into some of these definitions, in fact, you mentioned objective. Maybe I could even do that, pull up that now. Now, for me, objective and subjective, because I do a lot of discussions about objective morality, which is something that I believe in. I had a debate last night with Mark Reed. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Let's see here. So I guess I was on morality. Where is the top? I haven't used this as much as. Is there just the letters themselves we could just click at the bottom of this, or how is that? Let me full screen.
Yeah, all the letters at the top,
There it is.
And that'll take you down.
Yeah. Oh. Objectivity. So we've got actually objectivity, objectivism, and objective theory of values. So for me, objective is basically pretty simple. It's stance would be stance independent or mind independent of any mind. That's as basic as it gets for me. Would you agree with that definition, or should I select one of these, objectivism or objectivity?
I'm not sure what the best one is. That might be a good one. There are different senses of the term. It looks like maybe that's alluded to in the first sentence of that excerpt. There's a metaphysical sense of objective, and then there's an epistemological sense. And I think the one you mentioned, stance independence, that more aligns with the metaphysical sense. I don't typically use that term stance independent myself, but I do think I think there is a valid sense of objective that basically means that, or mind independent. Actually, I probably use that more often in my own thinking, but maybe it's a synonym, close enough idea to stance independence. But I do think that's one sense of objective, but not the only one. And I think perhaps the more relevant one is the epistemological sense, where there's a contrast with subjective, but there's also a contrast with another term which Ayn Rand introduced, which is intrinsic. And I know that's discussed in, I think it's the entry on the objective theory of values. If you clicked on that one, it would probably give the contrast very nicely between the objective, the subjective, and then what Rand calls the intrinsic. But maybe just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Let me see. I was just responding to a comment real quick. So let me see now. Under select which one now? Objectivity.
Objective theory of values.
Okay. Yeah, I did see that. I think. Let me. There we are. Okay, here we go. Objective theory of values is the only moral theory incompatible with rule by force.
Yeah, that's actually a different passage than the one I thought might show up. I'm clicking on a different. Oh, I think this is the. Okay, well, I just went to intrinsic, and that has part of the passage, but there's a passage in her book Capitalism: The Unknown Ideal, which I think that passage is from, and I'm looking for it on my Kindle library, and I could read it from that. And I don't know if there's a way for me to share it, but if there is,
you can share your screen.
Okay, I just found.
If you add it to this, and I can add it to the studio if you share it with me.
Okay. Yeah, I just found the passage. It looks like it's 2 or 3 paragraphs, maybe, or 4 paragraphs. So let me go to StreamYard and see if I can. I've never tried to share my screen on StreamYard before. I'm trying to figure out how I do that. There's a wheel here. Oh, that looks like it's taking me to something else. Visual effects. No. What is this? Oh, share screen. Okay. I think that's going to do it. Let me try that. Share screen is easiest with 2 monitors. All right, not going to do that. All right. Google Chrome app bundle. Would like to record this computer's screen and audio, grant access to this app. I have to go into my system settings to grant access to this. Let me try that.
It should pop up basically in the back room, just like when. Oh, you don't use StreamYard, so you wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know. So you pretty you're pretty comfortable with the Zoom. I know that's how you tend to do your live streams. I found StreamYard is really nice. There's a lot of features. Now, I don't have, because my work schedule, in fact, my work schedule's gotten even more hectic. I recently took a promotion, which is nice because I'm making more money. And that's always nice. But unfortunately, it's more problems too. You know how that goes. And so my time is even more limited for YouTubing and stuff. And there's a lot of features that are available through StreamYard that would make my presentation a lot more professional and entertaining for the audience. And I do need to spend some time, kind of learning how to make this a little bit more professional. Deconverted Man, who was in the chat, I don't know if he's still here. He actually, the other day, he wrote a song for me. It's hilarious. I was really flattered that he would take time out of his day to do that. And it would be a great intro or outro song. It's so funny. I need to figure out how to play it on one of these live streams. I can't believe he did that. It is so hilarious. But yeah, so I've got I need to eventually put together like an intro video or something like that. But there are a lot of options available through StreamYard, which does make it nice. And I still haven't seen that pop up, so I don't know if you're still looking for that.
Okay, I think I found what I need to do, but I want to just minimize a few windows before I grant it access. And I might also need to close this StreamYard window and then log back in. So I might disappear from StreamYard for a few seconds in order to get this to
It
work.
should be the same link to log back in that you've got in your email.
Okay. I'm just closing every window here that I know I'm not going to need. Make sure I don't share the wrong thing. Okay, I think I got that set correctly. All right. So I'm going to StreamYard. Where's my... Oh, now it looks a little different. Sorry for this delay. I have to find a way to... Okay, I think if I do one other thing, I will...
While you're doing that, let me just go ahead, and I always try to plug it, channels, especially the people who have supported me. I really appreciate that, but anybody who pops into the chat. So I had mentioned Deconverted Man. Really enjoy the content he puts out. I don't know if he does this for a full-time job or what. It seems like every day he puts out at least one video. So Deconverted Man is very active on his channel. There's always something entertaining, informational, educational, however you want to say that. He does a really good job. He attacks a lot, really focuses on attacking bad apologetics, and he's really good at it. I would almost consider him to be a counter apologist. I don't know if he would define himself that way, but he really does break down the worst of the worst apologetics. And I don't know where he finds all that stuff on YouTube, how he's got time to dig all that up. But every day he's got a new show. Recently, I've seen he's done a couple of animated shows, kind of like in line with like a non-stamp collector, and oh my god, it's hilarious. Really funny guy. I really enjoy his stuff, so I will definitely make sure to get a link to his channel in the description. That's Deconverted Man. Robin has a channel. Robin, I believe, recently had a debate, which I have not had a chance to catch because, like I said, I just took on more work, and I've been so freaking busy with that. But I'm hoping to kind of get my schedule dialed in a little bit better so that I could get some more free time back. But for right now, I'm just taking it. I do too much overtime. But I think Robin had a debate recently. She could probably mention that in the chat if she did, and let me know if is that still, because I thought for some reason you were going to do either a recap or a co-stream on Joe's channel, the Kentucky Atheist. So let me know what the details are, and I'll try and get a link to that in the description of this video. Skeptic Philosophy is here. Skeptic Philosophy also has a channel. He does a really good job with his channel, and as you can imagine, he discusses a lot of philosophy. He discusses ethics. He also talks about counter apologetics, or addresses some of the bad talking points that you get from apologists. So I will get a link to his channel. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else in here who's got a channel. I try to plug everybody and promote all of you guys. Everybody basically I just mentioned, I think for the most part, has platformed me at one point or another before I had my own channel, and I'm very grateful to that. My channel has been growing much faster than I thought it would. I can't believe, I think I'll probably hit 150 subscribers in the next week or so, if not sooner, which I've only been doing this for less than 2 months. So I can't believe it's growing that fast. I'm well over 11,000 views now on my videos. So the channel is growing, and a lot of that's because you guys have supported me and kind of gave me a name before I even started. So I had a really good jump on it. But let me see. It looks like I do see that has popped up, Dan. So let me grab that, add that to the stage. Okay, there we go. And so let's say, so anyway, now back to, I'm sorry for derailing things somewhat. Yeah, so we're basically getting into objectivism, or objective, the definition and terminology of how that's being used. I mentioned I use it as stance independent. Dan was saying that's more of a metaphysical application. I do find it to be fairly useful because oftentimes when I'm talking about objective, I'm really focusing on, oh, speaking of channels, there's B.S. Lewis, another guy who has a great channel and who does hilarious content, again, along the lines of like a non-stamp collector. B.S. Lewis also has an outstanding argument. He calls it, I believe, a trilemma. And it's essentially an argument. Well, I'll have him on the show one of these days soon, or he might come on today and discuss it more. I don't want to give out too much of that, but definitely check out B.S. Lewis's channel. He does a really good job with that, and I will make sure to get a link to his channel in the description of this video once that posts. So I apologize, Dan. So go ahead and go ahead and tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay. Sorry about the delay there. So as I mentioned, there's a metaphysical sense of the term objective and an epistemological sense. And that's not the relevant sense in a lot of philosophical discussions, I think, when it comes to epistemology or ethics. So in those realms, Ayn Rand developed what you can call a trichotomy, not just a dichotomy between subjective and objective, but she introduces this third category, the intrinsic. And I'm going to read from a passage here where she discusses the three. Now, she's talking about these three, intrinsic, subjective, and objective, in connection with theories of the good, but they can also be discussed apart from theories of the good, but just in terms of theories of knowledge. Like you could say, take any piece of knowledge, like 2 + 2 is 4, or there are 7 days in a week, which don't really have anything to do with values. You're not saying something is good or bad, right or wrong. You're just stating facts of the matter. But even just these factual claims to knowledge, those also can be categorized using these terminologies of intrinsic, subjective, and objective. But this passage is applying these three terms specifically to the value realm. So that's what we're going to hear about. So there are, I think, about 3 or 4 paragraphs that I want to read here. So this is what she says, quote, "There are, in essence, 3 schools of thought on the nature of the good: the intrinsic, the subjective, and the objective. The intrinsic theory holds that the good is inherent in certain things or actions as such, regardless of their context and consequences. regardless of any benefit or injury they may cause to the actors and subjects involved. It is a theory that divorces the concept of good from beneficiaries and the concept of value from valuer and purpose, claiming that the good is good in, by, and of itself. Now, just before I go on here, I want to give one or two examples to concretize this. It might have a kind of unclear or floaty meaning, but I want to tie it down to some concrete reality. So religion is often given as a sort of example that would exemplify this theory. You have these 10 commandments, for instance, in the Christian religion or the Judeo-Christian religion. You're just supposed to obey these because they are God's commands. It's not because they necessarily benefit you. Now, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but you have to obey them simply because they are commands of God, not because you're not obeying them only because you judge independently using your own mind that following these commandments will benefit you. It's just because you are commanded by God. That is enough to make these commandments deserve your allegiance. So they are just good in themselves. They're intrinsically apart from their consequences on your own well-being. Now, you might say there's an element of consequentialism within Christianity because it says if you obey God's law, then you will be rewarded, maybe only if only in the afterlife, in a heaven beyond the grave. So there still is some kind of consequence motivating obedience to commandments. So if you want a more pure version of the intrinsicist theory, I think you need to look to someone like Immanuel Kant, who had this duty ethics theory of morality, where you should do your duty because it's your duty, not because it has any benefit to yourself. And Kant is explicit about this. He thinks that actually corrupts the motivation behind an action. If it's performed out of self-interest, if it's performed in order to benefit yourself, that takes away from the moral credit you deserve for performing the action. But if you just do your duty because it's your duty, if you regard it as an intrinsically good thing to do, regardless of its consequences on your own life, then you're following an intrinsic theory of the good. Okay, so now let me go on from that to the next paragraph where she talks about the subjectivist theory. Okay, so then she says, quote, "The subjectivist theory holds that the good bears no relation to the facts of reality, that it is the product of a man's consciousness created by his feelings, desires, quote, intuitions, unquote, or whims, and that it is merely an arbitrary postulate or an emotional commitment." Okay, so let me see if I can come up with some examples to concretize that a little bit. So if you think something is good simply because you feel it's good, independent of whatever effects it has on the world, I don't know, maybe Trump would be an example here. He just has some whimsical desire. I want to take over Greenland, or whatever, and he might think it's good just because he has this desire. He hasn't carefully considered what effects this has. He just has this desire without thinking it through. Or maybe if you're to take a different sort of example, you're a abuser of drugs and alcohol. You have this immediate desire, which is compelling you or motivating you to pursue your drug or alcohol habit, irrespective of the long-range consequences on your life. You just have this whim of the moment, and you allow yourself to be driven by those whims or those desires, and you think that it's good simply because it's good to pursue the drugs and the alcohol, simply because you have this desire in your mind. So it doesn't bear a relation to the facts of reality, like your long-range well-being. Or is this going to kill you the next day? Are you going to overdose and die? Are you going to get sick? And so forth. Okay, so those are some examples of following a subjectivist sort of view. And then, so I guess just to contrast it with the intrinsic view for a second, the intrinsic, he doesn't care about his momentary desires, right? So that he's not guided by his immediate whims of the moment. He just follows these commandments regardless of what's going on in his head. He just is blindly doing his duty. But in the subjectivist, on the other hand, he is completely worshiping the momentary states of his mind, and that's what he's blindly following. So I guess there's a kind of blind following in either case, but they're just blindly following different things. In the one case, they're doing what's in their head. In the other case, they're following something that somehow they got it, like they've come to believe it's their duty, some sacred religious text, for instance. Somehow they think they owe a duty to that. Okay, and then she sums up in the next paragraph a contrast between the intrinsic and the subjectivist theory. And she says, quote, "The intrinsic theory holds that the good resides in some sort of reality independent of man's consciousness. The subjectivist theory holds that the good resides in man's consciousness independent of reality." Okay, so now to the next theory. So she discards both of those. And in contrast to both the intrinsic and the subjective, she upholds the objective theory. And here's how she explains that. Quote, "The objective theory holds that the good is neither an attribute of, quote, things in themselves, nor of man's emotional states, but an evaluation of the facts of reality by man's consciousness according to a rational standard of value." Rational in this context means derived from the facts of reality and validated by a process of reason. The objective theory holds that the good is an aspect of reality in relation to man, and that it must be discovered, not invented by man. Fundamental to an objective theory of values is the question of value to whom and for what. An objective theory does not permit context dropping or concept stealing. It does not permit the separation of value from purpose, of the good from beneficiaries, and of man's actions from reason. Okay, there's a lot packed in there, and maybe I'll just unpack one or 2 points, elaborate on them a little bit before I hand it back over to objective ethics. So you might think of the objective theory as a sort of hybrid theory in that it combines both of the elements that the other two theories focus on, but apart to the exclusion of the other. So the objective theory marries the two elements. It's reality independent of your mind is relevant, but also your mind's grasp of that independent reality is relevant. And if you have both of those things together, then you have objectivity. So that's what she's stressing in formulations like this. In evaluation, and she italicizes that, that's an act of the mind of the facts of reality, which is independent of the mind. So you have both the mind and that which the mind is aware of. And that's emphasized also in this part that she has italicized. The good is an aspect of reality, but not independent of man. It's aspect of reality in relation to man. Okay, so it's got both of those elements, reality and man, or reality and man's consciousness, which is aware of reality. And I'll also just note this part, of value to whom and for what. So I think that distinguishes her view from what's often called an objective theory in ethics, where objectivity is taken to be something stance independent. Here she's saying, no, if you're going to say something is a value, like you say this banana here is a value, well, it's not just a value in itself intrinsically. It's a value to me, or maybe to a monkey, right? But it's a value to someone or something who is benefiting from it for what? For some purpose, in particular, sustaining its life, its well-being, its survival, its happiness. So the way you often hear the term objective used, it divorces values from an agent and some purpose to whom and for whom something is a value. But that's not the way Ayn Rand is understanding objective. So I think I'll pause there, and yeah, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That was pretty clear and actually relatively concise. I do think it's very interesting. In fact, this came up quite a bit last night. This comes up often in discussions about ethics, especially when you get to the objective versus subjective, because ultimately you do have to, you're getting into a value system of our oughts, what motivates us, right? To actually, do a certain action or whatever. And I think Kant, you mentioned Kant, and one of the things when he was trying to basically address Hume's argument, in particular the is ought gap, Kant came up with like the hypothetical imperatives as an example of there's essentially what we might consider to be we sometimes it's referred to as a hidden premise in the argument. So you might say something like in a hypothetical imperative, like if a doctor wants to perform a successful surgery, he ought to sanitize his equipment, right? The hidden premise there that's not being mentioned is that the doctor, we assume there's a value in this successful surgery. And it's a logical assumption because the doctor has invested lots of time and money. You could look at the Hippocratic Oath, so on and so forth. So there's all these things that you could basically just assume that this doctor is highly motivated to have this successful surgery. So this kind of gives you how you can justify your ought into your arguments is you've got to have this motivation, this good, this underlying good, right? And there is ultimately going to be a subject, quote unquote, to that. So when we talk about people's choices and what we want to do and stuff, ultimately we have to assume, I believe, that we have to assume that humans do value life, existence, and I think that's, to me, that seems kind of common sense. I've actually had some interesting discussions with people who are antinatalists recently, and antinatalism is the belief that you should not be bringing babies into the world because there's so much suffering, so it's immoral to have children, which to me is kind of, it's self-refuting because you're also denying the children any positive experiences by not bringing them into the world if you really want to make the full argument. So I think it's kind of self-defeating in that way. But the fact of the matter is that from a very young age we are actively choosing to live. It is a choice, because if we don't make that choice, then we're frankly not here. And the same is for every organism. We look at evolution, these successful organisms are the ones that are alive. The ones that, the unsuccessful mutations or hereditary traits went extinct or did not survive. So they're just not here. So what's here is at least what's working. And in most cases is what's most fit for the environment, at least currently, right? Until there's another mutation or environmental pressures change. So the mere fact that we are living a life infers that we have a certain value established to life itself. And I do believe that and I didn't do the best job last night in that debate for several reasons, but one of the things I tried to convey is that ultimately people want to not just live, but they want to live a good life, right? A fulfilled life, a life that's fulfilling. And I think that's kind of just a given, because I don't think it's coherent to say people actively want to live a unfulfilling life. And so I think we can build a moral argument over our oughts based on these assumptions or these presuppositions that we want to live a life and we want that life to be good. So I do think there are objective standards that we can, once we establish a particular subject, we can come up with an objective good. For example, I think I used the analogy last night. We once the game of chess, we invent the game of chess, right? So this is an argument that I use with religious people, trying to help them to understand divine command theory and subjectivity versus objectivity from the stance independent position, is that, because a lot of religious people say, oh, morality is objective because God is the moral principle, moral agent that determines all this. So it's all objective, but that's really not following the definition. The basis is that God sets the rules. God's a subject. God has a mind. God has a will or intention. So therefore it's subjective. The game of chess is something that we set up. So we're subjective because we have our own opinions, our own minds, our stance. But once the game of chess, once the rules are established, excuse me, then you can say objectively there are good moves to make or bad moves to make. So I think you can then come up with an objective standard for anything almost. Once you have established a certain value or a certain criteria, you can build up from there an objective: what is good, what is bad. What do you think about that?
I have a lot of thoughts stirring in my mind right now. So maybe I can start on the last points. I don't know if I would say that let me try to frame it in a certain way. You mentioned hypothetical imperatives, and th- that is contrasted with categorical imperatives. So, for anyone who's not familiar with these terms, categorical imperatives are statements that you should do such and such, like thou shalt not kill, or thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not bear false witness. And period, right? It's not you should do such and such if you want to achieve such and such results. If it had an if built into it, then it would be what's called a hypothetical imperative. So if you want such and such, then you should do so and so. That would be a hypothetical imperatives. And on Rand's view, there are no categorical and imperatives. She saw Kant, who was a proponent of categorical imperatives. She saw him as her arch enemy in multiple ways, in ethics as well as epistemology. And I found a passage, which, if you don't mind, I'll share, that is directly on this point of hypothetical imperatives. Let me see if I can share that. Share screen. Here we go. Okay. Does that show up now? Yeah. All right. So it's the paragraph starting with, I'll start with the one that says life or death. Life or death is man's only fundamental alternative. To live is his basic act of choice. If he chooses to live, a rational ethics will tell him what principles of action are required to implement his choice. If he does not choose to live, nature will take its course. That is, he'll just die. And then continuing, she writes, reality confronts man with a great many musts, but all of them are conditional. The formula of realistic necessity is you must if. And the if stands for man's choice. If you want to achieve a certain goal, you must eat if you want to survive. You must work if you want to eat. You must think if you want to work. You must look at reality if you want to think, if you want to know what to do, if you want to know what goals to choose, if you want to know how to achieve them. Okay, and then she goes on to contrast that with duty, which she gets to in the next paragraph. So I just wanted to share this to help emphasize the point that she does have a hypothetical imperative approach to morality. There are no duties. There are only things you must do if you want to achieve some ends. So if you do want to achieve life and happiness, flourishing, well-being, prosperity, then there are many things you need to do. And she has a whole list of virtues that she thinks human beings need to adhere to in order to achieve their happiness and well-being, such as the virtues of honesty, integrity, justice, productiveness, pride, rationality. That's the basic virtue for Rand, being rational. But they're all in the service of life. That's the only ultimate goal that she thinks it makes sense to pursue. So the fact that there is a choice at the base of morality doesn't make morality subjective on Rand's view, at least as I understand it. So I think some people might try to argue that, and I don't know that I've 100% got it completely clear in my own mind, but I can at least say that she does have a hypothetical approach to morality, but that doesn't mean, on her view, that morality is subjective or arbitrary. And we can dig into that some more if you'd like, but I will pause there.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to let me take, because I think since we're discussing this, let me remove this. It's still up for you to mess with, and then let me bring this back up because I'm on morality here, just so we can kind of, let me see if I could. That's so tiny for me to read. Okay, so morality, according to Ayn Rand, what is morality or ethics? It is a code of values to guide man's choices and actions, the choices and actions that determine the purpose and the course of his life. Ethics, as a science, deals with discovering and defining such a code. The first question that has to be answered as a precondition of any attempt to define, to judge, or to accept any specific system of ethics is, why does man need a code of values? So this is, and then she says, let me stress this. The first question is not what particular code of values should man accept. The first question is, does man need values at all, and why? And then this builds up from what you were talking about. So this is the hypothetical of the if. Once we've established why we have this code of values, that once we've established a need for this code of values, then we can come up with objective standards to what is good. Am I following that correctly?
Maybe it's at least in the ballpark. So if well, let me say a little more here on in her analysis of why it is that we need values. She points to the phenomenon of life. It's only living organisms that have values. And we should have a definition of values on the table because that's a central concept that's coming up in this discussion. And she gives a characterization of what a value is, not necessarily a definition, but at least a initial characterization, which I see you're pulling up on the screen there. And you let me make it a little bigger so I can see. So in the you just read the no, I guess that was maybe a slightly different passage, but I'll read from what you put up there,
All right.
where she gives her initial characterization of what a value is. To challenge the basic premise of any discipline, one must begin at the beginning. In ethics, one must begin by asking, what are values? Why does man need them? Value is that which one acts to gain and or keep. The concept value is not a primary. It presupposes an answer to the question of value to whom and for what. That came up in the example of the banana I gave earlier. Like a banana is not just a value, period, full stop. It's a value to you if you're having it, or to a monkey if it's eating it. And for what? For that monkey's life, or for the monkey's or your well-being. Okay, and then she goes on that she says a value presupposes an entity capable of acting to achieve a goal in the face of an alternative. Where no alternative exists, no goals and no values are possible. So what would be something that doesn't face an alternative to contrast this with? A rock. So a rock doesn't face any alternative, and a living being does. It faces a fundamental alternative, the fundamental alternative of life or death. And that's a point that Rand emphasizes. It's only living beings that face a fundamental alternative, namely the alternative of life or death. And that's what gives rise to their pursuit of values. If they didn't face that alternative, if they were just inanimate entities like rocks, there would be no reason for them to pursue anything. A rock has no reason to pursue one thing as against another. It has nothing at stake. It doesn't have anything to lose, anything that matters to it. Whereas living organisms do have something at stake. They have their life at stake, and they can lose that. So in this observation Ayn Rand makes about the tie of values to the phenomenon of life leads to the view that life is actually the standard of values. It's an objective standard. Given the nature of what a value is, it's something that an entity pursues in order to keep it living. Then that tells us that life is, that provides what she calls an objective standard for regarding something as a value or as not a value, or as good or bad. I mean, these terms are all related: right and wrong, good and bad, value, disvalue. But what gives rise to all of these terms is life. So since life is what gives rise to values, life is what we should use to judge whether something is a value, i.e. whether something is good or bad. So that's maybe the core of her argument, that life is what provides an objective standard of good and bad. But let me read a little more here, where she elaborates on some of the things I was just saying. She said, I quote from Galt's speech. That's a character in her novel Atlas Shrugged, John Galt. She says, quote, "There is only one fundamental alternative in the universe, existence or non-existence. And it pertains to a single class of entities, to living organisms. The existence of inanimate matter is unconditional. The existence of life is not. It depends on a specific course of action. Matter is indestructible. It changes its forms, but it cannot cease to exist. It is only a living organism that faces a constant alternative, the issue of life or death. Life is a process of self-sustaining and self-generated action. If an organism fails in that action, it dies. Its chemical elements remain, but its life goes out of existence. It is only the concept of life that makes the concept of value possible. It is only to a living entity that things can be good or evil." And then she gives an example of an immortal robot to flesh this point out. I'll just read that paragraph, then I'll stop. "To make this point fully clear, try to imagine an immortal, indestructible robot, an entity which moves and acts, but which cannot be affected by anything, which cannot be changed in any respect, which cannot be damaged, injured, or destroyed. Such an entity would not be able to have any values. It would have nothing to gain or to lose. It could not regard anything as for or against it, as serving or threatening its welfare, as fulfilling or frustrating its interests. It could have no interests and no goals." Okay. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you.
I do think this is quite interesting. So my personal model for objective morality is based on agency. Skeptic philosophy had mentioned something. I think it's really important. It kind of does harken to what I was talking about before about living things. Things that want to live are alive. Things that don't want to live cease to exist, or things that are not capable of living. They're not strong enough, not fit for the environment, whatever. They're just not here anymore. But I do think that agency is a fundamental property of humanity, or humanness, if you will. And so even a person choosing to not live willfully, which is why I am actually a proponent of assisted suicide. I don't think there's any reason or anything immoral or unethical about letting people make the decision to pass on, to cease to exist if they're going to. I don't think it has to even be qualified with serious medical problems or anything else. I think if a person is suffering from some kind of chronic depression or something like that, whatever, people should be free to basically exercise their own agency, as long as they're not affecting the freedom and well-being of others, is my view and my stance for the objective moral position, right? It's all based on agency. So a person who actively chooses to, cease to exist, they are using their agency to do so. So they still have the value in agency. So that's where I differ a little bit from this particular position. But, I do agree, though, that the behaviors towards people, we can come to an objective standard once of good and how we ought to treat each other once we establish that there is a particular value in life, in something like I said, agency, freedom, and well-being, for example. Human flourishing, you mentioned that. I know that in the secular community, there is a push. It's actually growing fairly steadily. I forgot my notes yesterday. I was so sick. I've been fighting this terrible cold and flu, and somehow half my notes for that debate got deleted, and I was really frustrated with that, which actually kind of took some of my focus away because I didn't realize it until I'd already started the debate. But one of the notes that I had taken was about some of the studies that I had read, and that objective morality, or more realism, is actually a growing trend. And I see a lot of big name atheists, even such as what's the guy's name? He was Harris, Sam Harris, for example. He's now taken this objective moral position, for example, but he bases it on human flourishing. That's a really big argument that skeptics are making for the objective position is based on human flourishing. And I think that if human flourishing is a goal, which as organisms, right, organic organisms, we do want to um, not just survive individually, but we want to reproduce. That's kind of one of the actually hallmarks of life. I've been watching some really fascinating documentaries. They're looking for life in other planets, life in outer space or whatever. And the definition of what is life becomes paramount there, because what are we talking about? Are we talking about just aliens, human beings, or pseudo human type things walking around, grays as they're called, or whatever? Life actually has been reduced to some really fundamental concepts, right? Which is basically something that is capable of taking in energy, producing energy, and reproducing, and capable of Darwinian evolution. So really basic fundamental of what life is. And at that point, I think we're going to find life all over the place. I think that's how life came here on Earth, right? So um, we do have this flourishing as an inherent goal as living organisms. And given the fact that we are a social species, our flourishing requires cooperation. And I think once we establish all of that, then we can come to objective standards of what is going to promote this cooperation, and that's moral behavior, right? We ought to act morally because that helps us to reach our ultimate goal. What would you say to that?
I have several thoughts here. If I'm looking down, it's because I'm looking at my notes here, not because I'm ignoring you. So you mentioned the case of suicide, and not just because you might have some terminal disease, cancer, which is very painful, but maybe just because you're depressed. And you mentioned agency, valuing agency, and people's being able to choose for themselves whether to live or not. And you said you might have some difference with Ayn Rand. I think you imply that, but you might be closer than you realize, because I think she would fully support having agency over your own life and being able to decide whether to live or not to live. And it could be very well be the case that you have a good reason to end your life if you have either some painful terminal illness, or you're caught in a concentration camp and it doesn't seem like there's any hope of escape, or if you're depressed and it looks like there's nothing that can cure your depression, rather than just go on living in misery. It could be rational, tragic, but it could still be the rational thing to do in some cases, to take your own life. And so what she promotes is survival, but she sometimes affixes to that this elaboration of what survival means if you flesh it out. And she uses phrases like survival qua man, or survival qua rational being. Qua is just a Latin term for as. So you could be in existence, but that's not necessarily a good thing. So like if you're in a coma, right? If you're just in a vegetative state, that's not a good sort of existence to have if you are a human being. Like if you're a vegetable, then it's fine to be comatose or to not have consciousness, right? But if you're a human being and you're comatose, then that's not a life worth living, and it can make sense to pull the plug. I guess you couldn't do it yourself if you're in a coma, but it can make sense for your loved ones to pull the plug in that sort of situation. So I found one other passage which is on this point, which I'd like to share from her essay, The Objectivist Ethics. And let me pull that up. Okay. Should be visible now. There we go. Okay. So she's elaborating here on what she means by survival qua man. Such is the meaning, quote, such is the meaning of the definition, that which is required for man's survival qua man, which is her standard of value, right? And here's her elaboration. It does not mean a momentary or a merely physical survival. It does not mean the momentary physical survival of a mindless brute waiting for another brute to crush his skull. It does not mean the momentary physical survival of a crawling aggregate of muscles who is willing to accept any terms, obey any thug, and surrender any values for the sake of what is known as, quote, survival at any price, unquote, which may or may not last a week or a year. Man's survival qua man means the terms, methods, conditions, and goals required for the survival of a rational being through the whole of his lifespan in all those aspects of existence which are open to his choice. Okay, I'll stop reading there. And I'll just say, as I was reading that, some examples came to mind of what would not be survival qua man, like when she talks about survival of a mindless brute waiting for another brute to crush his skull, or a crawling aggregate of muscles willing to accept any terms, obey any thug, and surrender any values. I was thinking of ICE right now, because if you pay attention to the news, you might have heard a lot about ICE up in Minneapolis and all the havoc that's being wrought, and they've now shot a couple people. Some people say these have been murdered. Now, that is not a sort of life worth living, right? If we have to live in these sorts of conditions, that's not a sustainable kind of life. That's not man's survival qua man. This is a case of men living as brutes. On which side are the brutes? We could debate that, and I have certain views on that. But this is a case where men are living in a subhuman way. They're not living up to the potential of man. They're not living as rational beings. They're living like animals by the rule of brute force. And that's not the kind of existence or survival which is unsustainable. It's not the kind of existence which is proper to man, the rational being. That's how Aristotle defines human beings, as the rational animal. But if you have a rich, robust understanding of what survival means, then that sort of life is a life worth living, and a life that's one can properly hold as a standard of value. Okay, I'll pause there.
Yeah, this actually does relate to our discussion on ethics, so it's not a complete derailment, but there are several questions that I had for you regarding politics. And just to preface this, most people who follow my channel probably are well aware that, one, I'm an independent centrist. I have a lot of problems with both the left and the right. So I do not promote one side over the other. I think both the far left and the far right are batshit crazy. I don't think they have any interest in really promoting an effective economy. I don't think they care about this country. I don't think they really know what they're even talking about. They're idealistic. That's my own opinion from what I observe. However, I admit fully that because I am so frustrated with the political system here, I am really ignorant about politics in America. The last time I voted was Obama's first term, and I did that for idealism. I'll be honest. I thought it was I wanted to support having a black president, and he was terrible. He was a horrible president, maybe one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And so after that, I said, okay, unless we get a really good candidate who I really support what they're trying to do with the country, I will vote for him. And of course, we haven't had one since. Obviously, I think every single president we've had has been equally bad for their own reasons. I don't think Trump is any worse than anybody else, to be honest with you. I don't think he's any better, but I just think they've all been horrible. And so when I talk about politics, I may just be unaware of a lot of key issues, key policies, and things that are happening because it's so frustrating for me every time I watch the news. The other thing is it's a real chore for me because I do intentionally, anytime a news story catches my attention, I will intentionally search out both sides from the reporting, because you're not going to get this true story from the left or the right. So you've got to look at both sides. And then if you can find independent media, then I'll do that as well. So it takes a lot of research for me to figure out on any particular subject for whatever's happening in the news. And as you guys know, I don't have time for all that bullshit, and I don't have the energy for it either. So, just take all that for what it is. Okay. So I may say something about a political position or situation, and I may be off base because I just haven't done my research. I'm just not well informed. Right. But regarding the ICE situation, I do see this as very problematic for multiple reasons. Um, Ultimately, we have to come down to the values like we have been talking about, right? We've got to establish a certain value system and then build our judgments up from there. So that the base level comes down to borders and security and the country. What defines a country? Do we need borders? Should we even enforce borders at all? Should we just open up borders? Should there even be such a thing as a separate country? That's a really interesting discussion to have, because if you don't figure that out first and foremost, I don't see how we can possibly have a productive discussion about whether or not we should have ICE agents doing anything, right? I mean, if we think we should have secure borders, then you can start to justify some of the stuff. Now, the way that they're going about it, that can be problematic. But should we even have ICE at all? If we don't think we should have a country, well, then we don't need border security. We don't need border enforcement. We should just let people go do whatever the fuck they want, right? So I think that we need to establish certain value systems before we can then build the conversation up from there. So looking at the thing from instead of the bottom up, like I would prefer to, if we just start the top down, which is what's all in the news. I think now there was just recently a shooting. There's been a couple. Obviously, the Renee Good got a lot of attention. I think it was just yesterday. I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I believe there was just another person yesterday who was shot and killed by ICE. You're getting conflicting reports. Was he armed or not? Some reports are saying all he had was a cell phone in his hand. I just caught that this morning, so I don't know enough details, but I know that there's a situation there. There was another gentleman who was shot, I think just after Renee Good, who was wounded, shot in the leg. The reports were that the agents were actually being attacked by protesters, essentially, or other people who were trying to defend the guy that ICE was going after. So there was a potential self-defense there, but I haven't really looked into it. The Renee Good situation I did look into quite a bit. And to me, that is a perfect example of how something can be legal and still immoral. It seems to me, based off the footage that I saw, that according to Minnesota law and the way it's written out, and I don't have any of that pulled up in preparation. I didn't know if we were going to talk about that, because I should have pulled this up, because there is actually laws written specifically about what is self-defense and things of that nature in the law, as most states do. The law has to get very technical these days. And so it does appear, based on the video footage that I saw and based on how the law is written, it appears to me that there is a legitimate case, legally speaking, for self-defense in that situation with Renee Good. However, I would say it's pretty obvious that it was highly immoral what happened, highly unethical to shoot the lady, especially considering the majority of the shots went through the side of the car, right? At that point, the guy's life is clearly not in danger anymore. There's a potential argument people could make to say, well, if this person was willing to drive her vehicle with a human being in front of the vehicle, whether or not she was trying to kill him or not, set that aside. The fact of the matter is he was in front of the vehicle. She did move the vehicle we assume she knew he was in front of it, because he was right there in front of the vehicle. So you could say, well, maybe she at that point is reckless and so scared maybe that's her justification. She's so scared that she's willing to just drive through people. We have no way of knowing. You can't make that argument one way or the other, but it's clear that she did move the vehicle where there's somebody in front of her. So maybe she was a danger to other people, not just that ICE officer. So maybe he could try and justify it. Well, I shot because I thought she was going to go through an intersection in fear for her life or fear for her safety or whatever she was in fear of her freedom. I don't think she wasn't being targeted as an illegal immigrant, but maybe as somebody who was trying to interfere with their operation or whatever it was, because I think she was just a protester. But she definitely was trying to take off. And having been involved, and I'm not proud of this, but I do have firsthand experience, having been involved in a high-speed police chase myself previously, and I did time for that. So as I should have. I can tell you, it's extremely dangerous and extremely selfish. And you're running red lights, you're exceeding the speed limit, going through construction zones, school zones. All you care about is getting away. You get this fight or flight instinct. And so having been there myself, I know how dangerous that can be for pedestrians. And so, there's a lot of angles to look at that. Even given all of that, I just think because the rate that she was moving, the situation at hand, I don't think that she was really going to go blasting through intersections. And so I think those shots through the side of the window are just not morally justified. So I think it creates an interesting dichotomy between what's legal and what's moral. And I think that one of the discussions I've had regarding ethics is, even though many laws do cross over into what we consider morality, like murder, right? It's illegal to murder people. We also consider murder to be an unethical thing. The fact of the matter is, we don't legislate morality, right? In most states, it's not illegal to tell a lie. For example, some states it actually is, which is interesting. But most states it's not, or at least it used to be in some states I've lived in. But I don't know if it still is or not. But I know in Oregon, for example, it's not illegal to tell a lie. But we consider lying to be, in most cases, we consider lying to be unethical. So the point is, we don't legislate morality. And I think there's an interesting, we have to be willing to separate those two when we talk about these things. Now, I know you've discussed the Renee Good situation quite a bit. I don't know how up to date you are on the other two incidents that I mentioned. You brought up ICE. So let's just jump into that really quickly, if you don't mind. Why don't you give your synopsis of the Renee Good situation? I know you had at least a whole day live stream on that particular topic. Do you mind kind of just giving us a summary of how that conversation went, your feelings about that, and what I just said?
Yeah, I could say some about it. So just to kind of zoom out a bit, and then I can zoom back into the particular shooting. In general, I'm very opposed to Trump. I think he's a horrible president. Maybe the worst president ever. So I don't see him the way you did. You said, like, we've had all these bad presidents, Obama and so forth, and none is really much better or worse than the other. They're all bad. But I see Trump as a uniquely bad president. Like, I think he's the worst, maybe by far, in our lifetimes. And I think there's a tie-in to the sort of ethics that Ayn Rand describes here. So if we want rational self-interest, I think Trump is very irrational. I think he is someone who is often driven by whims, like, I want to take Greenland because they didn't vote for me to get the Nobel Peace Prize or something. So very childish, irrational, kind of whimsical driven presidents. And he's I don't even know that he cares that much personally about immigration, as opposed to just playing to his base. I think the MAGA base gets really riled up by this issue. I mean, he's married to an immigrant. I think he's been married to 2 immigrants now. So I think it might just be more that he sees power in playing to his base, in taking an anti-immigration stance, and that might be some of what's driving him. I'm very pro-immigration. I think our immigration system is horrible, and we need to radically rewrite the laws to make legal immigration much, much, much easier. I think the reason we have so many illegals, so many millions of illegals, is because we make legal immigration so hard. I think even impossible in many cases. We have quotas. There's only so many people who can come in each year. And sometimes it takes years, tens of thousands of dollars in lawyers if you have to hire immigration attorneys in order to come to the country. Whereas it used to be, over 100 years ago, back in the days of Ellis Islands, it was as simple as you buy a ticket, you take the boat over, you get off the boat, maybe you go through the quarantine check for a few minutes, and you're in. And that's it. Now it's like there's so much red tape you have to go through in order to become a legal resident of this country. So when you have these very restrictive immigration laws, and I think all the arguments against it are bad, at least the ones I've considered, like they're going to take our jobs. You have no right to a job, right? I can hire whoever I want. If I'm an employer, I don't owe you a job. I should be able to hire whoever I want. It's a violation of my freedom if the government says, "Oh, I'm going to force you to hire an American," as opposed to whoever the best is that I can find. they're going to take our welfare, right? They're going to be parasites on the system. There shouldn't be anywhere welfare in Ayn Rand's system, right? Everyone should have to support themselves. No one should be a burden on anybody else in the system. So no one should be getting welfare, whether you're an American or an immigrant. I don't want anyone to be parasitizing on anyone else. Everyone should have to support themselves. So we need to radically overhaul so many things about this country. And I think until we do, there's gonna be these very tragic situations. I don't think there's a way to make our immigration system as it is now work. So, I mean, we have to do fundamental changes to our political system, and people have to fundamentally change the way they think about immigration and rights. You know, what are rights? You talked about sovereignty earlier. What exactly does that mean? But now, zooming out from that kind of big picture onto the specific case of Renee Good, which I had a live stream on my channel about a week or two ago, at Dan Norton 1. That's my channel. So it seems plausible to me that it was an unjustified killing. Like, it seems like he could easily have not gotten himself into this situation. Jonathan Ross, the officer who shot Renee Good, it seemed like he was kind of maybe itching for a fight, if not itching to kill her, at least very confrontational. Not trying to de-escalate things like the way I think these sorts of situations should be handled by the police, in a rational way. I don't think ICE behaves in a de-escalating kind of way often. I think it often seems like they're like eager for a fight and trying to provoke something. And then they get into these situations where maybe you could argue, okay, he thought that there was some chance that his life was in danger. I don't know how plausible that is, given all the minutes leading up to the actual second of the shooting. He didn't seem terribly worried to me. And it seems like he could easily have jumped out of the way, and maybe he should not have been in front of the car in the first place. And now that he got himself into that position, maybe there's at least a slight possibility that he could claim some kind of self-defense case. So I guess just to give the bottom line of my analysis of the Renee Good case, which I said during my live stream, I think I said I'm not certain it's murder, but I think it's possible, maybe I should say even probable, that it was not a justified killing. At the very least, it should be investigated, and that's another thing. I think it's tragic that this is not even being investigated. The last I heard, yet they are.
Wait a minute.
Investigating.
Let me just. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but that blows me away. So are you saying that they're not doing a formal inquiry into the some kind of oversight committee or something is not involved in that Renee Good situation?
That's my understanding, I think if there was any investigation, it might have only been done by something within the executive agency themselves, as opposed to like the Minnesota police, which is not controlled by like the Trump administration ultimately. So you have ICE, and then they're within the Department of Homeland Security, which is an executive agency, part of the executive branch. So ultimately, it reports to Trump. But and then there's also the Department of Justice in the FBI, which I think is part of the executive branch. Someone out there can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding there has been no independent investigation. And I think Minnesota wanted to investigate, and actually they were not allowed access to the scene. So yeah, I think if there has been any investigation, I don't think there's been an independent investigation. Of course, if your own agency or the department you report to is investigating what you did, you might think that there's some bias there. So I think there ought to be some independent agency that's not ICE related that does investigate this scenario. But to my knowledge, there isn't.
Well, I do agree with you, and I'm sorry. I want you to continue what you're saying because I really appreciate your insight, but I just want to, because this is stuff, like I said, I'm really ignorant about a lot of things. And so I appreciate in the chat also, I really appreciate the conversation you guys are having about this, because it's helping me to see different angles of it. But I just, as far as like an IA type of an investigation or something, I agree that there is definitely the risk of a bias. However, the bias can work both ways. The bias can actually be against the individual being investigated if the bias is towards giving a public view or a public image that the organization wants to present. So if they wanted to present themselves as really cracking down on any unethical or any activity that violates their policies or whatever, they may go harder on a situation. They may even set somebody up internally if they think that it's going to have an overall benefit. So I think that bias can actually work both ways, believe it or not. But I do think that there's always going to be a civil case that can be had, irregardless of what the DOJ does, because given the fact that it happened within the country, you're always open to, you could sue anybody. Anybody can sue anybody in this country, right? So as far as that, the family members, or I believe she was married, or in fact, her spouse was in the van as well, I believe, in that situation. So she was there firsthand. I'm sure that I have no doubt that she's got a trauma that's going to result from that emotional suffering and stuff like that. And that's perfectly understandable. Because I do think it was, I can't say unjustified. I do think unjustified, whether it was lawful or not. Excuse me. According to what I saw, it seemed like it may have been lawful. I still think they should do an investigation into it, because it would be interesting to find out, did all 3 shots strike her? Is it the shot that went through the front window that was the fatal shot, and the other 2 were, because all these things matter, believe it or not. It's the devil's in the details, as they say. But otherwise, just at face value, it seems like it was probably illegal. And if they're not doing an investigation, that reinforces my thinking that they are pretty convinced it was legal. I do think it was unethical and immoral. And I do think that there's a civil case that could be brought up, irregardless of what kind of internal investigation or DOJ investigation goes into it, policy and stuff like that. But so that is okay. So that just blows me away that there's not more going on with that. So go ahead, continue. I hope I didn't derail you too much, because I just wanted to jump on that. I was blown away when you said there's not an investigation.
Yeah, that's my understanding, at least not an outside independent investigation. And just yesterday, there was another shooting, which I haven't looked into as much. I've seen a little about it. I think his name was Alex Pretty, and 37-year-old man. And it seems like this one is even harder to see a justification for. He was on the ground. He had a gun, but I think it was holstered. I don't think it was drawn. At least I haven't seen that. And someone actually, I think it was one of the ICE agents, took the gun out of his holster while a bunch of other people were like on top of him and pinning him to the ground. So I don't see that he could have been any threat at that point. And then they shot him when he was on the ground with, a bunch of people on top of him. I heard there were 10 shots. So now I've only looked into this a little bit. So there's always, there could be the fog of war. You don't know exactly what's happening, maybe conflicting reports, and it may take some time for the facts to come out. But from what I've seen so far, it does not look good. And it looks like maybe it was even worse than the Renee Good case in terms of whether there could be any justification. So
I also want to follow up with what you were saying, because I actually do agree that the biggest problem that we have in America, in my opinion, and it's a massive influence on what's happening in real time with the ICE situation. A huge problem is our border policy in general. I'm not completely against having a border. As a moral realist, I do actually think that we need to be working together as a species, like all humans. And I really do promote that a lot. Like, we are all brothers and sisters, metaphysically speaking, so to speak, not from any religious concept or whatever. I just believe we're all connected as human beings, and we need to work together as human beings. Our biggest benefit, because cooperation is the greatest benefit to our own survival, even if you look at it as from like an Ayn Rand's more selfish perspective, which I don't see that as being a problem necessarily. I think it does create an interesting conversation as motive. Why are you helping other people? Is it because it's to your own benefit? Well, as long as you're helping other people, ultimately, I think that's the most important thing. And I think we need to be working together. I also support diversity, though. So we, instead of trying to force everybody to agree on everything, force everybody to like the same things and believe the same things and think the same things. I think diversity is really important. And it's one of the things that makes this world so beautiful is having different ideas. It's also one of the things that promotes technological growth, the growth in technology and every other field, art, diversity in art and stuff like that, and culture. So we need to find a way to support diversity and still be working together. So you can see having countries, separate places for people to exist, there is a certain practical benefit to that, because then you can develop these diverse beliefs. But so borders is kind of tricky. But if we are going to have borders, right, and security is important because there's a lot of bad actors out there, unfortunately, right? And so having some type of border allows you to institute certain policies and laws. So there's a practical reason to have borders. But because America is such a perfect example of how beneficial diversity can be, right? Because America has been built on the backs of diverse people coming from all over the world here. We have all of our doctors come from all over the world. Scientists come from all over the world. Judges, politicians, everybody else. I mean, we have so much diversity here. I've lived in a handful of states now in America, and I visited several of them. And I've just been exposed to so much beauty in different cultures, great food, believe it or not. I love the diversity in food and culture, art, and all this stuff. And it's really what makes America, in my opinion, still the greatest country in the world, despite our problems. And the reason I think that's the greatest country in the world is because we are so diverse. So given that, and given the idea and trying to map that onto actually having a border, I think that we just need to loosen up the border policies, like, significantly. I've got some of the kids who work for me. A couple of the girls are actually from Venezuela, which is really interesting, talking to them about what happened with Maduro and Machado and all that stuff that's going on there, because they have family that's down there right now and they come from there. So, they're to get legal here. It is an investment. In fact, I got another gal who her husband is from Pakistan. And so they're Muslims. And so in fact, I think I'm one of the only white people, I think about it, at my work. But there's thousands and thousands of dollars and years to get legal citizenship here. And so many people who are coming to this country, especially from the southern border, are extremely poor. That's why they're coming here. They don't have thousands and thousands of dollars. So we're almost forcing their hand to a certain degree, forcing people into this situation of being illegals here. And we're creating our own problem. And I almost wonder sometimes if that isn't one of the biggest issues that I see with America, is I see that it seems like we do create problems just so we could justify having to fix them, because there's an investment of money and resources, power, things that go into that whole situation. So it's like, invent a problem so that you can invent a solution, kind of a thing. And I think that we're doing that with the borders. I think if we opened up the borders, not open them up freely for people just go wherever, I think that's probably not the best idea, at least right now, because you could spread disease. Even if you're not bringing criminals in and out, there's disease and other issues, right, that can happen from that. But I do think that making it significantly cheaper and significantly easier, less time, makes the most sense, given the fact that we know that immigrants are, generally speaking, more law-abiding than people who are born here. Most people that come into this country, are actually far less likely to commit crimes than people that were born here. Most people that come into this country, because they're coming here to make money, and oftentimes send a lot of their income out of the country to support their families, and they still got to pay their rent. They still got to pay all the high American prices for everything. So they tend to be very hardworking people. They will oftentimes work 2, sometimes 3 jobs, right? So they're extremely hardworking on average. They're generally very peaceful and law-abiding on average. So I don't think that there's any justification that we could say, well, we don't want these immigrants coming in here. The country was built on the backs of immigrants. The country is supported largely by immigrants. Even people who work under the not under the table, but people who work here that are here illegally, that have jobs, they are just giving in to like Social Security and stuff like that, and they'll never be able to draw that money out. Right. So they're just feeding into a system they're not even going to receive benefits from, technically, in a lot of ways. So I just don't think there's an argument to be made that we should be restricting these people from coming into the country and making it so difficult for them. So that's my feeling about the whole border thing.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot there, and I feel sympathetic to much of what you said. Um, I'm thinking, what should I add here? What one point I'll make is I think drugs should be legalized. I think that would reduce a lot of the crime and potential danger that there otherwise might be. Like we saw in the Prohibition era, when alcohol was prohibited back in the 20s, there was a increase in gangs, and you had mob bosses like Al Capone. Um, when you make something illegal, you don't get rid of it; you just drive it to the black market, and then it becomes, you drive up profits because it's so risky to engage in that um, industry. So the risk drives up the potential profits and makes it much more expensive. So I think drugs would become much less expensive, and the profits would go way down, and so there wouldn't be a need. You wouldn't have the kind of crime that you see today if drugs were just legalized. And maybe more fundamentally, the reason to legalize drugs um, is because people have a right to do what they want with their own body. So if you're consuming something as an adult, as a consenting adult, you have a right to consume whatever you choose to consume. No one has a right to stop you from doing that. To do so would be to violate your freedom, on Rand's view. So according to Ayn Rand, you should be free to act as you choose, so long as you're not initiating force, using physical force against someone else to stop them from acting how they chose to do. So if you choose yourself to take drugs, you're not interfering with anybody else's action. I can go on acting how I want, even if you choose to take drugs. So you're not interfering with my life. Maybe you'll hurt yourself if you take drugs, and I think you likely will. It's probably not a good thing to do, to get addicted to drugs, but you should be able to do that. People should be free to guide their own lives by their own judgments, and they can be rational or irrational. Whether they're rational or irrational, they should have a right to do it. So I think the immigration issue is very related to the drug legalization issue, because I think one of the reasons people oppose just opening the border is because they think there's going to be this wave of criminals coming over, and I have a little trepidation myself about that. But if we legalize drugs, then I think that problem would go away essentially. So that pulls the rug out from one of the main arguments against opening the border.
I do think that if I may interject here,
Yeah.
I don't know if I spoke about this on my channel. I feel like you and I have had this conversation, so it must have been on your channel, unless we did this before already. But I want to hit on this again. Having overcome a drug and alcohol problem myself, I have firsthand knowledge, and having lived on the streets, and I know the drug industry very well firsthand. I'm glad to be away from it, but I will say the idea of legalizing drugs, is decriminalizing drugs, actually is not necessarily a good idea. It depends on how it's implemented, frankly. So in the UK and other places where they had done this, and they were actually very successful with this, as opposed to states in America that tried this and was extremely unsuccessful, it's because of the way that it was implemented. The way that it's successfully implemented is, if you're going to legalize the drugs, then what you do, excuse me, is you have the government issue the drugs. Right? It's just like they did with the marijuana dispensaries. So the government basically regulates this process. So in other countries, they would have, so you would go to I guess you call it a dispensary. When you walk in the door, you can go, let's say, just visualize this with me for a second. You walk in the door and you could go, there's like the DMV or something. You got a section to the left, you've got a section to the right. On the left-hand side is where you would go to get your drugs, clean needles, whatever it is. And on the right, you go and you have access to counseling, and the counselors are able to help you with home placement, job placement, mental health, all the different things that we find are motivators for people to actually use drugs, right? The lack thereof is what motivates, it tends to drive people into drug use. Depression, anxiety, and things of this nature, trauma, mental health. These are the things that tend to drive people to drug use. People are not, generally speaking, as counterintuitive as it sounds, most people who use drugs are not doing it for a good time initially. They're doing it because they're trying to run away from something. They're trying to get away from some pain, some trauma, or they have some kind of underlying mental health issue. This is what drives most people to using drugs. There's the money aspect of it, which is why drugs are being provided to people. But the actual use of drugs, it's not because sticking a needle in your arm or putting poison into your body actually feels good, quote unquote, right? The feeling that comes from being inebriated is something that a lot of people have to build a tolerance to or get adjusted to. Once they do that, then that becomes part of the addiction, which does make it more. One of the reasons it's so difficult to get off this stuff is because the whole process feeds into the addiction itself. So if you are offering these services, which are really the solution people are looking for when they're using drugs in the first place, and you put it in the same building that you're dispensing the drugs in, right? Not only are people getting clean drugs, so now you're not getting your cocaine or your heroin or whatever laced with fentanyl, for example, or your battery acid or whatever the hell else they put into shit to try and make it cheaper. They're chopping all kinds of stuff into these drugs, right? And so you're getting clean drugs now from actually licensed doctors or clinicians or whatever, pharmacists and stuff who are regulating this. So it's much safer overall. But the actual reason that people are using drugs, the solution's right there on the right. And what they found is that like 95% of the people, when they first walk in the door, they're all going to the left because that's what they're there for, is to get the drugs, right? What they found is that consistently and steadily or progressively, more and more people, when they came back, started going to the right because ultimately they're looking for a way out, right? And the drugs are not providing it for them. They're never going to be a solution. So it just, instead of just decriminalizing things and letting street dealers sort the market out themselves, is not a good idea because then it increases violence. You're getting people tainting the drugs because it's cheaper for them. They can lace it with whatever they want. It increases addiction, all these other problems that come from you're fighting over territory. Instead of just letting people just do whatever the hell they want, you actually regulate it. I think that's the key. It's how it's implemented is very important to the actual success of it all. But I do agree with the overall premise that, Reagan's war on drugs, it was a huge problem because what it does is it targets already marginalized people and underprivileged communities, right? Poor communities are the ones that are most likely to use drugs because, again, drugs are this escape from your problems. People who are rich don't necessarily tend to want to throw their lives away on drugs because they've got all kinds of money. They can go travel. They can do other things for escapism, right? When you're poor and on the streets, drugs and alcohol is readily available, and it's basically a quick way to escape. So when you put this war on drugs, what you're ultimately doing inherently is now making a war against poor people, a war against marginalized communities, right? And so this is a real problem, the war on drugs. We need to figure out a better solution.
Okay. So several thoughts. I do remember our initial discussion on my channel about drugs. So, but I guess you're stimulating some new thoughts here now. So one thought is I don't think it's just a problem for poor people. Like the example of Charlie Sheen came to mind. I think he might have been someone who was abusing drugs for a while, an movie or TV star, and I think rock stars famously sometimes overdose on drugs. I think, but I do what I think is right. What I agree with what you're saying is that drugs is not like a fundamental problem. There are deeper problems that give rise to the use of drugs, which is why what people really need is to go to the place on the right, as you were saying in your example. Instead of going to the drug dispensary, go to the counseling place and get help with what is the source of the problem, what's giving rise to the problem. And maybe what's giving rise to the problem is going to vary from case to case. But one thing that I think may contribute to the problem is a horrible education system. Like I see the US public education system as, in large respects, a wasteland. I mean, we from time to time we hear these terrifying statistics about how badly American kids do on standardized tests compared to other countries around the world, and like they are years behind where they should be in terms of what reading level they're at, or what level they're at with mathematics. I used to be a tutor myself, and I tutored middle school kids for a while, like 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and some of them couldn't read yet. These are kids who are like 10, 11, 12 years old, Some of them literally could not read. Like I had to do phonics with them to help them sound out words. They couldn't do basic arithmetic. So our education system, maybe there are some exceptions here and there, but by and large, I think it's been a disaster. And I'm not really surprised by it, given my political philosophy. The U.S. government has basically taken over a K-12 education system, and you have to be rich or wealthy, quite well off, if you're going to afford to not only pay the taxes to send your kid to to pay for other people's kids to go to public school, but also on top of that, be able to pay for your own kid to go to private school. For many people, I think that's just not financially feasible. But if we had a free market system, I think that would drive prices down. Innovation would drive prices down. I mean, people are competing for customers. And I think our education system would be vastly better. And you wouldn't have kids for whom public school is like a daycare or like just a place to hang out, and they learn nothing or very little. I think a lot of cases are being, they're learning the wrong things, but they're being indoctrinated into false views like environmentalism and the world is going to be overheating and catastrophe. That's a big subject, which I know is controversial, and we can talk more about that. But I think there's a lot of miseducation going on in public schools, and it's not turning out good individuals who are ready and prepared to face life as mature adults who can think and support themselves in an independent way. So I think the sort of education system we have primes people to end up pursuing something like drugs, because life does start to seem very hopeless, and like they're not able to support themselves. Maybe they'll end up on welfare. So all these things are related. So if we had a free society, a free market system, then I think our education system would be much better. I think in turn that would result in people much less likely turning to drugs. It wouldn't be some vast epidemic sort of problem. It'd be a much more minor thing. And so that's part of the overall picture, which I think is important to factor in. I'll pause there.
I just wanted to, I'm just going to reiterate this. I just put it in the chat, but I just want to make sure. So as far as my policy on the language is this, I am not personally sensitive to what people want to call me. If people want to misgender me or call me names or whatever, I've got way bigger problems in my life than to give two fucks about what people call me or something like that. So I don't care. You guys can call me whatever you want. You can say whatever you want to my face or behind my back. I could care less. However, other people are very sensitive to these things, and I think for justifiable reasons. People have disabilities. People have other depression, anxiety because of certain things that they can't control, whether it be a mental condition, the color of their skin, their gender, whatever it might be. People get attacked for so many nonsensical things, and there are people who are legitimately sensitive to this stuff. Now, I personally would like to see people have a thicker skin because I think there's more important things to be worried about, but I can't control that, right? I can't tell other people to toughen up, and I have to be sensitive to their feelings. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that I really don't like to police people's language because I think we're all adults here, but I do think that there are just some things we want to just be careful about when it comes to labels and stuff like that. And again, you guys want to tell me something, I don't, hold that against you. You can say whatever you want to me personally, but when it comes to people that aren't here or communities, especially marginalized communities, let's try to just be respectful. I always try to tell people, if you've got a thick skin, like I have a thick skin, saying something to you, you might be like me, but what if it was your mother or your sister they were talking about or something like that, right? Like I've got a nephew who has autism, and he is the sweetest kid, really smart, brilliant kid. And he's got some serious problems. And so I would not want people calling him names or making fun of him, right? Because he's an angel. He doesn't deserve that. So even though I might have a thick skin about it, I still wouldn't want people talking to somebody I care about like that. So try to keep that in mind. And again, I don't like to have to say these kind of things because I do think that we should live in a world where we should be able to say anything, frankly, but unfortunately that's not the world that we live in. People have feelings, and we should treat other people like we want to be treated, and like we want people to treat our loved ones as well. So just let's try to walk in everybody else's shoes for a minute before we and I'm not calling anybody out specifically here. I'm not trying to make a big deal about anybody individual. I see some chat going on, some stuff going on in the chat. I just want to put that out there. So for people watching the video, what my personal policy on some of that stuff is. So, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to detract from that. So yeah, Dan, I do think that there are issues that can be seen both ways. You mentioned, I know we've gone way away from the ethics and stuff like that, but this is so fascinating to me. So if you don't mind, I'd like to stay on this track because I really have been curious about this position with capitalism. And we're kind of running in that direction here with politics and stuff like that. Do you mind if we continue down this road?
No, it's fine.
So you have mentioned a few times now, I've heard you talking about this, that we should do away with these public services. And correct me if I say anything or misframe anything, okay? Because I could be wrong about something. So please step in anytime. But my understanding is that you're saying we should do away with these public services, that people should basically be responsible for themselves as individuals. This Ayn Rand's, I assume, version of capitalism. Is that where you're getting this from?
Yeah, on her view, the only thing the government should be doing is protecting individuals from force. So police would be one proper function of government, to protect you from criminals like robbers, rapists, murderers. The military, that's another proper function of government, to protect you from foreign threats who would come over and possibly enslave us, conquer us. And then a court system, that's the third one, to peacefully settle disputes between people. So if you have an issue with someone, instead of going up to them yourself and maybe getting in a fist fight or a duel or something to settle it, you can peacefully settle it through the court system. So that's the role of the government, is to extract force from society through the police, the military, and the courts. Other than that, everything should be handled by the private free market. So education, roads, healthcare, retirement, all that stuff is good and fine to have, but it shouldn't be the government that's doing it. It should be the private free market.
So if everything, I'm just trying to just play devil's advocate here for a second. So I haven't necessarily thought deeply about all these things. So I'm not trying to promote a particular idea here. I'm just trying to give a little bit of pushback just off the top of my head, because it seems to me, I do agree that people should take more accountability for things. I do agree that that too much government is a bad thing. I don't know if I talked about it on your channel or on my channel, but I know girls that I had dated. I dated a gal when I was younger, and I ran into her sister later on as an adult. And she was telling me that the gal I had dated had gotten herself pregnant a couple times, had a couple kids, and was basically she was single, a single mother, and she was getting all kinds of money from the state because she had these two kids and had no job, and she's on welfare and whatever. And I was thinking to myself, because I grew up in poverty and what a terrible thing this was, as she's telling me this story. And she absolutely blew my mind, because then the next thing she asked me is if I would get her pregnant, because she wanted to get some kids so she could get this free money and stuff. And I was so disgusted I was really pissed off when this whole thing happened. And so there are women out there who are doing this, who are motivated to just have children as a resource to basically get free shit. And that is a problem. However, I think that not supporting single mothers is also a problem, right? So how do we fix that? I don't know. The other issue I see is, I don't think so for example, when it comes to something like school systems, we have a public school system right now that's taxpayer funded, which means it's protected under the Constitution, right? So freedom from religion is a major aspect of our secular school system, our public school system, that I think is very, very important. I think freedom of religion and freedom from religion is extremely important, and we keep it out of the school system. And I think we should do that. Now, I'm not an anti-theist. I think if people want to be religious, no problem, do your thing. Just don't hurt other people. But I don't think we should be teaching children that the earth is only 6,000 years old, that there was a global flood, that talking snakes convinced some lady to eat a magic piece of fruit, and now we're all sinners. That's insanely ignorant. I just can't believe some of the things that religious people believe, and they indoctrinate their children in these beliefs. And I think that's really sad, because these kids grow up doubting evolution and all this other stuff, doubting scientists. They're all conspiracy theorists and all this stuff. I just hear the craziest stuff coming from religious people that just blows my mind, that people can have that low of an understanding of how the real world works around them. And it's just, and so I think it's very dangerous, and I don't think we should be subjecting children to this on a massive scale like this in the school system when they're so vulnerable. They rely on their teachers to give them good fundamental information. So if we take away public control of that, then basically these religious schools are going to be popping up everywhere. Right now, they do have private schools, and I support their right to do that. If they want to put their own money into these private schools and stuff like that, and they want to send their kids there, ultimately that's going to be their right, right? Okay. But to just have all schools be open to this, this private funding, to now we're giving the parents the right to institute these religious practices into these schools, because 93% of the people on the planet are religious. So most of the parents in America, by the numbers, are religious and would probably like to see the 10 Commandments up on the wall. They'd probably like to see evolution not be taught in schools in large numbers. And I think that's very dangerous. So the education system concerns me without that oversight. The third thing, I think I mentioned this on your channel before, is that so one of the things I studied in college was fire science, right? And so I was going to be a firefighter. So I got my EMT 1, my fire science 1 and 2. And in studying fire science, we looked at the history of the fire department and stuff like that. And it's quite fascinating that initially fire departments were privatized, right? And not regulated. There was no oversight, no government oversight. And what was happening is, talking about a little before what I was mentioning, where you create a problem just to solve it, firefighting companies were actually starting fires so they could get paid to go put out the fires. The other issue is, you'd have a fire and you'd have multiple fire companies pulling up to put out the fire, and they would end up getting in brawls, fist fights out in the street, because that's their money, right? They're both fighting each other to see who gets to fight the fire, and the building would burn down in the process. So, I mean, real problems that we've actually seen history, how this unfolded by not having government control or oversight over the fire department, for example. Hospitals and stuff like that. These are private, I do believe, actually, for the most part. But I think hospitals currently are private. We have government insurance, but we don't have government hospitals, I don't think. So that's, I guess, a separate issue. I agree with the policing, right, and the military. We've got to have those supported by the government. The court system, I agree, needs to be done at a state and federal level, I think, is important. And I think it's important to have a division between state and federal. So before I overwhelm you, what do you think about those issues that I brought up?
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me start with the single mothers you were talking about. So you were concerned, like you said, yes, some single mothers might abuse this, and you mentioned the case of someone who wanted you to get her pregnant just so she could collect more welfare checks. On the other hand, you're concerned about other single mothers who are not doing that sort of thing. So I do think that it's right that there are a mixture of people, and some are nefarious and some aren't. But even, let's take the case of the non-nefarious single mother. Still, it's her responsibility. She made a choice about getting pregnant. So she is the one who is responsible for raising that child. I'm not responsible for paying for somebody else's child. If you're going to make the decision to have a child, you should be the one responsible for that child. That's part of being responsible for yourself. So no one has a moral claim on anyone else. Like, I'm not your servant. I'm not your slave. I don't exist to serve you. I'll voluntarily interact with you. Maybe you can ask me for help, maybe out of charity. I will voluntarily help you out. And I think there are private charities who can help people in difficult situations, but you don't have a right to point a gun at me, or to send the government agent on your behalf to point a gun at me and threaten me with jail if I don't pay my taxes, which taxes ultimately end up paying for your life. No, your life is your responsibility, and you need to own that fact. So that's what I'll say to that. And we can go back and forth on that more if you'd like, but let me just address some of the other points you raised. Public education, you were concerned that if we didn't have the government control over it, then maybe religion would creep back into curriculums. But I don't think the solution there is not public education. I agree, religious theology is irrational and makes no sense, and kids shouldn't learn that that's the way things are, that the earth was created in 6 days by the whim of some supernatural being. But just because the system is public, I mean, you could have a theocratic system like in Iran, where you have I don't know what their system is, but they might have a government education system, but because their government is controlled by theocrats who want Sharia law and want to promote Islam, maybe their government education system forces Islam down people's throats. So what's important, I think, is a separation of state and governments. Not giving government control over education. That's not necessarily a solution to the problem. And right now, when we do have, I think like 90% of K-12 education is public education run by the government, you have these pressure groups. So some parents who send their kids to school probably do want creationism, and so they lobby the school board or whoever it is to include some of that in the curriculum. And then you have more secular parents who also send their kids to the same public schools, and they lobby the school board to include Darwin's theory of evolution. So you have these pressure group warfares clashing with each other, both trying to get their views into the same school. And I don't think there's any good solution to that. I think what you need to do, privatize it, and then let the market just sort things out. So if you're a religious parent, you can send your child to a religious school. If you're a secular parent, you can send your kid to a secular school. Otherwise, you're forcing your ideas down other people's throats. You might think you have the right ideas, but they also think they have the right ideas. So, and now I don't think they're both right. I think one is right and the other isn't. But I think we need to respect people's freedom, and that's a more deeply important thing than getting your particular ideas into everybody else's heads. I think it's important to recognize children have free will, and I think you disagree with that, because I've heard you say you're a soft determinist actually in the debate last night. But and that's another issue we could talk about if you like. But I think children have free will, and just because their parents try to indoctrinate them when they're children, they can still choose to think for themselves. It might be more difficult for some kids than others if they grow up in certain kinds of households, but you can think for yourself as a child, and many do, and you can break away from the environments you were raised in. Just because you were born into a Christian household or a Hindu or a Muslim household doesn't mean that's your destiny. And there are cases of people who they grow up in India, let's say they're a Hindu, but then they escape their culture and they become an atheist or an agnostic or something. So I think it's more important to respect people's freedom than try to indoctrinate kids with your particular favorite ideas as a kid, rather than have someone else shove their ideas down people's throat. Okay, and then I think there's one other point I wanted to respond to. Oh yeah, fire departments and hospitals. Okay, so I've looked a little bit into the history there, but not much. So maybe you know a lot more about it than I do. But the examples you gave don't strike me as how things would work in a free market system. You talked about firefighters brawling with each other in order to determine who gets a fight. Well, that's a form of initiating force, which I don't think. So as I said, like the fundamental principle of Ayn Rand's philosophy is you can act as you choose to act, so long as you are not coercing someone else. But if you start a fight, if you throw fists at someone else who was there on the scene first, who had a contract with a customer to put out their fires, then you're violating their rights. You're initiating force against them. So if I have a contract with fire company A to put out my fires, if there is a fire, and then a fire company B shows up and tries to beat me up so that I can't put out the fire, well, then I can sue that person, take him to court and fine him. So that's not allowed. You can't have brawls in that sort of way. So I don't think that's the way a free market system would work. And I think there's often a misunderstanding of how things would work in a free market system. And that some of the problems you're concerned about, I think actually wouldn't arise. And lastly, just on hospitals, I think another thing I haven't looked into much, but I know a little bit, and my understanding is they are quite regulated. Like, you can't turn away patients in an emergency room. You're required by the state to serve them. And I think some of the reimbursements, the way hospitals are reimbursed for their treatments, is regulated by the government. And I know some physicians who also are in the objectivist world who know a lot more about this than I do. But my understanding is that the health industry is heavily regulated. The FDA being part of that, regulating drugs. So I don't think it is. I wouldn't say that the health industry, including hospitals, is a private system. It might have elements of privatization, but I wouldn't say it's fully private. I'll pause there.
Okay, I actually was listening to you and trying to follow the chat, which is, I'm not good at this. And so apparently there was a comment that was made by one of the people from the community, Chris Moore, who I don't know if I said hello to you. I know I did in the chat, but hello, it's always good to see you. And I think I have the correct comment highlighted on the screen. It was a question he had for you. I'm trying to see if this is a... Okay, so Tilting Windmill, who's kind of helping regulate things, keep me on track here. Which, Tilting Windmill, it's always so good to see you, brother. I really appreciate your support for the channel. The best mod in on YouTube, as far as I'm concerned. He's all over the place. Everybody probably knows who Tilting Windmill is. You're doing a great job in the chat. And so it looks like the question I have was directed to you. And just so everybody knows, I actually am going to open up this panel for open discussion. Before I get into this question for you, just let me just kind of let everybody know what's going on. So I always open up the live stream to open discussion for people. I don't know how long Dan, I know Dan tends to go pretty long when he streams, but I don't know how long he was planning on being here today or how much energy he has for it. But I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to ask your questions directly to the guest. And of course, if he wants to take off at any point, you guys want to talk about something else, I really try to treat this like an open platform for you guys to get your own ideas out there, question my ideas, or comment on anything that's been said or done. So I will be probably in a few minutes, I might even start opening up the panel for people to join, because this discussion that's coming up that we're kind of leading into is a discussion that I really want to have with you about free will. But I think that conversation could go easily for another hour by itself. And I think at that point, I don't know how many people are going to stick around to join the panel, and I want to open it up to people. So I'd like to just extend you an invitation to come back so that we can get into that, because I do think that that's a really important conversation to have. I am a soft determinist. I don't think free will, I think it's kind of self-defeating once you get into the whole axiom of what free will actually entails. But again, definitions are very important, and it's something we talked about before. So I think that, once we get into a definition of what free will is, and I bet we could probably look at the lexicon and see what Ayn Rand says about free will. I would imagine it's in there. So maybe that's something that we could put a pin in that for next time, because really do want to have that conversation with you. I think it's the free will conversation is very interesting, because it entails not just how decisions are made, but there's a real ethical or moral conversation to be had about what do we do with criminals. Right. That's a huge problem right now. I do believe the justice system is broken. We need to focus on rehabilitation. And I think I can make an even stronger argument for that when we get into what causes us to make the decisions that we make. So at any rate, I just think if we get into that now, it's gonna just take us into a whole nother conversation. So let me read this comment out. This is from Chris Moore. This is relative to what we're talking about here. Okay, so basically, I guess I didn't get the specific initial question, but I think it looks like this is close enough. He says, okay, it is a question about how Rand's philosophy accounts for a society to take care of people with disabilities, elderly people, combat vets, etc. So what would Ayn Rand and capitalism and this privatized industries, how would you resolve or care for these groups of people?
Okay, so first thought on that is, I think it has an implicit assumption in the question that it is society's responsibility to take care of such people with disabilities and so on. And the only question is, how do we do it? So how should we? How does Rand's account for what is it? How does Rand's philosophy account for society to take care of? Well, it assumes that it's society's job to do this, and the only question is, how should it do it? But no, it's not society's job. Society is just a collection of individuals. It's each individual's responsibility to take care of him or herself. Now you can ask, well, what's going to happen to people who are in very like a or quadriplegic, someone in a very difficult situation? But I don't think it's the right framework to go into this issue with of what society is supposed to do about this. It's what should that person do? What should that individual do? And I think what that individual should do is ask for charity. If they cannot take care of themselves, they can seek voluntary assistance from other people. I think that's the proper way for that person to deal with their condition, not point the gun at other people and threaten them with jail if they don't contribute to their lives, or get a government agent to do the dirty work on their behalf. Voluntary charity is the way to go. And I think it's worth mentioning that the people who can't take care of themselves is a tiny, tiny percentage of people. I think it's well under 1%. The vast, vast majority of people, I think, can easily support themselves. Maybe not be a billionaire, but at least make enough money to support yourself. And so the number of people who literally cannot do anything to take care of themselves, like quadriplegics or maybe people who have severe mental disabilities, that tiny percentage of people will need to rely on voluntary charity. And I think that will be forthcoming in a free society, where I think there's more benevolence than there is when you're in a society where people are at each other's throats and coercing each other and forcing each other to help each other out. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I do. Let me get this off the screen so it's not right in the way here, distract people now. That was a great question, and it's something I was curious about as well, and I appreciate you addressing that. So one of the things that makes me skeptical about all this is, and again, I'm for smaller government, don't get me wrong, but I see problems with just getting rid of so much government support in just every way. And you're not saying every way, but we are talking about very limited resources. You're talking police, courts, and military is the only three that I heard mentioned so far, and that's a pretty small system of support for people. But
I think on the other hand, I think there might be a lot more resources in the private market as a result of that. Like I'm going to be much more willing to donate to a charity if I'm not having 40% of my income taxed away.
That is an interesting argument, actually. I have to think about that. So while I'm mulling that over, because that is an interesting, argument to make. So we look at an industry that the government's not really involved in. There's still certain oversights and stuff like that. But look at the housing market, right? This is private. We have been
that too. I would dispute that it's fully private. I think that's a regulated industry. Zoning would be one example of that.
Well, there definitely are regulations, and it can be.
So regulations, I think, means not private. That's an important point. A lot of people, they talk about regulated capitalism, but I think that's a contradiction in terms. If there are regulations, then, and we could talk more about exactly what that means, but like FDA, SEC, FAA, there's like all dozens of alphabet agencies. All these are violations of free market principles.
Well, what the government doesn't do now, zoning, I agree with you there, and there's certain issues with mandated insurance and other things like that, but property taxes, so on and so forth. But there is basically the government does not control pricing, right, or anything like that, as far as market value for houses and stuff like that. And what we see a major problem with the housing market. Houses are one of the strongest investments that people can make with their money. Property is, because property always increases. Now we have crashes because of this. We have predictable, almost, I hate to say it, crashes in the housing market. We look at what happened. Was that 2009? I think, I can't remember now exactly. Was that the 2008? We had the massive housing crash. I can't remember. It's a while ago, but anyway,
it started in 2007. I'm not sure exactly when it started.
Yeah. Okay, but back in the early 2000s, and this is a major problem. I mean, people were out of housing. The issue is we have so many low income people that cannot afford even an apartment. The house is completely out of the question. I mean, there are apartments in most major cities, and I shouldn't say most because I know it's much cheaper depending on what state you live in. But on the West Coast, for example, in fact, I think all the coastal cities, I don't know about Arizona. They're not a coastal city, right? Because they border Mexico. Are they on the Gulf there, Arizona? At any rate, I know Texas is, Florida, obviously all the East Coast, New York, and all that. Then on the West Coast, you've got Washington, Oregon, California. The cost of living is extreme, and housing is a major problem. An apartment, a one-bedroom apartment, can be $1,500 to $2,000 a month, which is insane money. A house, I'm helping my brother. I just recently helped him do the roof on his house. He's trying to get ready to sell because he wants the hell out of Oregon. And I can't say I blame him. Oregon has turned into such a shithole. It used to be such a beautiful state. It's still beautiful topographically, but as far as what's going on around here with people and everything, it's just insane. But his house is worth almost $1 million, and it is a basic house, like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single car garage. Maybe, it's a very small backyard. It is just a basic house. The neighborhood is fairly nice as far as it's safe, right? But there's no rich people, no mansions or something like that. $1 million for a basic house is crazy. You used to be able to buy a house like this in my lifetime for $25,000, right? And I mean, that's so much inflation on the housing market. And if we look at that, the resources, if we just turn everything over to the free market, anything that is limited, because there's only so many houses you can build, so much square footage of land that's even suitable for housing. A lot of people don't understand, if you've ever done like a long road trip somewhere and driven across the country or anything like that, you realize really quickly that there are vast swaths of land that are uninhabitable. Frankly, the ground is completely made out of stone, right? There's no water running. There's no electricity running. I mean, there's just a lot of the land is just uninhabitable. It would take so much terraforming to be able to build structures. So much infrastructure has to be built just to build the structures themselves, to be able to live in these places. And so a lot of it's called BLM land, for example, right? The Bureau of Land Management owns a lot of this stuff because nobody can live there. In fact, a lot of times they'll incentivize people to try and move out to these places and build them up. So because nobody wants to live there. It's so difficult. So the amount of space that you have to actually build houses is pretty limited. And so we see this problem, and it feeds into the rising costs, and the costs rise steadily every year, and it goes up a lot. And I'm thinking about now, every single thing, if we turn it over to people, the schools, everything else, the fire department, everything else, I see as being the same thing. It's just the cost is going to go up as the resources become more limited. And I see that as being really problematic. I think that government oversight on controlling housing costs is something that most Americans are really against, right? Because of the capitalism here. I know that Mamdani, I think it was, one of the things he ran on in New York was actually controlling or freezing rent prices. And he's getting a lot of pushback from a lot of Americans, but in New York, I think they love him. I mean, they voted the guy in, right? Running on this more socialist, I guess, the socialist Democrat, what he calls himself, kind of policies. So, I don't know. I'm really skeptical that the free market, if you have an abundance of something, then capitalism is great because competition actually drives down pricing. And that is the benefit to capitalism, right? But when the resource gets limited, then all of a sudden the price goes way up. And that can be true even if the government's in control of it. But the free market, it can go up even more. So that was what makes me concerned. The idea of supporting disabled people, military veterans. Now, the military veteran thing, I think if the government is controlling the military, funding the military, which we agreed that would be one of the things in Ayn Rand's system that the government would still be in charge of is the military. Maybe then the government would include helping the veterans out as part of that whole process. Because I know right now there are programs that are government funded, both federally and at the state level, for military veterans. There's not enough of these resources. I actually worked for a time for a nonprofit when I was basically retired and just looking for something useful to do. Instead of just going fishing all the time, I put some time in to help homeless veterans with transitional housing. And there are some resources, but they are limited, really limited. We have way too many veterans on the streets. Part of the problem is because the programs that we offer, because the government does run them, are restricted. And if you have a drug problem or alcohol problem, you can't use these, you don't have access to these resources. And which is why a lot of people stay on the streets, because they don't want to get rid of the drugs and alcohol. And so there are problems with the way that these are handled. And I think if the industries were privatized, some would have these policies in place. Maybe some wouldn't. Maybe some would have policies where, look, you could use drugs and alcohol and still get your transitional housing or whatever. But that creates other problems, because now you've got people all twacked out on meth or whatever the hell else, or drunk or whatever, and they're living in communities with other people, and you get violence and other theft and all the kind of issues that come from being high all the time or being around people that are strung out. So the regulation seems to be practical, in my opinion, which creates a problem. So I'm just not sure. I guess I'm just trying to think through all this out loud. I apologize. I'm not really linear with what I have to think more about that. It seems like, because I do see that, like I said, competition does drive down pricing. As long as there's enough of whatever product or service it is available, then the competition drives down pricing, and that can be better for people. But what about the disabled people? What about the elderly people? I mean, what about the homeless people? I mean, even if we say it's only 1%, 2%, 3%, I have a hard time seeing that percentage be that low. I mean, you probably know, you've looked into it, I guess, more than I have, but there's hundreds of thousands of people, homeless people, in the bigger cities like California, for example, where the weather's nice. There's thousands and thousands of them. Even up north where the weather's not so nice, like Washington, Oregon, and stuff like that, where it's a lot colder and wetter, there's tens of thousands just in the big cities alone of homeless people. It's all over the place. I know I just recently saw a documentary about in Alaska, where it's freezing up there. They've got a massive homeless problem because cost of living is so high up there to get resources, because of where it's at. It's so remote. People can't get jobs. And that's another issue I was thinking about, is the job situation. If we don't support, like with the resources that we give to single mothers, for example, or to other people, we have different programs that we basically give people. It's not Social Security. I can't even think what it's called now, but now we're forcing everybody to have to work. Right now, there's tons of jobs available. Even with the immigration situation, there's tons of jobs available. The reason there's tons of jobs available is because so many people, mostly people who are born here in this country, don't want to work. They know they can get free money from the government, so they're not working, which means we have an abundance of jobs. Even when the economy is not great, there's still so many jobs out there. I talk to young people all the time to try and coach them up. I try to put in time at the prisons and try and coach people up. When you get out, how are you going to put your life back together, and getting them to focus on work and stuff like that is paramount to turning their lives around when they get out, so they don't go back into crime. And if everybody was now forced to basically work or eat, I think we would be at a shortage of jobs, which it would be good to get people off their ass and get them working for a lot of reasons. But I don't know if if everybody was working, would we have enough jobs to support all these people? What do you think about that?
You want me to start with that one, or there was a long list of things you brought up in?
Yeah, I just went on a tangent. I apologize about that. I'm thinking out loud, and every time I think about one thing, it pops up another potential problem that I see. So I do apologize.
That's fine. I'll just go back to the beginning of the list. I think you started talking about the housing issue and how there's very high prices, and it's hard for people to afford homes. Like it used to be $25,000. Now that same house is $1 million. So I do think that it's an issue of supply and demands. And you alluded to this, like the more you have of something, the greater supply, the more the price goes down. But I think zoning aggravates this problem. So if we didn't have zoning laws, I think there would be much more housing supplied, and then as a result, the prices would come down. Related to this, there's the what's called the NIMBY movement, not in my backyard, and as well as I think many environmental regulations. I think that might put a stop, or at least a break, a slowing down on construction. Whereas I think a lot of, I just mentioned in passing earlier in the discussion how I'm very skeptical about a lot of environmentalism, that movement. I think it's based on a lot of pseudoscience. I'll mention Alex Epstein as a source people might look into on this topic. He's written a couple books on, including a New York Times bestseller, and I think he's one of the best thinkers on the issues of environments and energy, climate, that sort of thing. So if we didn't have all these restrictions on construction, if we didn't have zoning laws, if much more housing would be built, and I think immigration actually feeds into this, because if a lot of the immigrants are the ones who are doing the construction work, maybe I don't know if people hanging out at Home Depot might be part of the immigrants who do some of the work in building housing if necessary. But if we had a larger labor pool to pull from, people who are willing to work for cheaper than Americans might be willing to work, I think we might see a boom in construction, in the housing industry, and not just of single family homes, which I think is a lot of what zoning does, is they make non-single family homes prohibited. But if we had multifamily homes, more of those, maybe more apartment buildings, we would see that the cost of housing come down a lot, and that might help the homeless problem somewhat. And maybe jumping ahead to that issue, the homeless issue, I think another thing that might help with that is getting rid of minimum wage laws, right? If you have someone who's very low skilled, maybe he's been on the streets for a long time, he's not cut out for many lines of work, but maybe there's something very simple that he could do, like rake leaves or shovel snow in someone's driveway for a few dollars an hour. Well, that's not much, but maybe you can at least buy ramen noodles and not have to panhandle and rely on other people. You could start to become self-sustaining, and over time you could get a few more dollars per hour and a few more dollars per hour, and you could build up self-respect on seeing yourself grow and being able to become a self-sustaining individual. So I think minimum wage, that prices out people from the market who otherwise could be working, supporting themselves, and that can help reduce the homeless problem. People can now support themselves and maybe not afford a mansion, but at least afford something, maybe a tent, or maybe share a room with somebody, split a room with a few people. And then over time, over years, you get to a better and better living situation. Let's see, what else did you have on the list? Military veterans. So I do think I think maybe the care of the veterans should be separated out from their activity as fighters in the military. So, but it could all be spelled out in contracts, so in advance. So, like if I'm going to sign up for the military and I get injured, maybe I lose a limb, then this is what's going to happen on the other end of that. I'm going to have this, that, and the other sort of insurance plan in place. But importantly, it's all going to be voluntary. So no one's going to be on the hook to forcibly support somebody else's life. So I might want to contribute voluntarily to some veterans funds to help wounded soldiers, because they help defend my life, my freedom. And now, whether my funds are filtered through a government organization or they go to some private organization, it doesn't matter that much to me right now, at least the way I'm thinking of it. What's most important is that it's voluntary, that I'm not being coerced by the state to make this contribution. It's a voluntary contribution. Let's see, anything else I want to say? Shortage of jobs. I don't think that will ever be a thing. There's, for all practical purposes, I think an infinite amount of work that people can do. You can always make your life better. I remember we talked in the previous conversation about this, like AI and the advance of technology. Like maybe at first you have horse and buggies, and then you evolve to the car. Now all the horse and buggy drivers, they lose their jobs, but now they can work in the car manufacturing plant. And now if we import robots to do all the jobs the people were doing on the assembly line in the car plant, well, now you can get a job, repairing the robots or something. So I don't think there's ever going to be a shortage of jobs. It's just that the type of jobs that are available are going to change, and I think even become better and more interesting. There'll be less like manual labor, and more mentally challenging and involved sorts of jobs. And I'll stop there.
I'd like to post a link, if you don't mind, to invite other people to join the conversation while you're still here, while you still got a little energy for it. Let me get that into the chat here. There's a lot of really great comments, a lot of great feedback from the chat, and it's so hard for me to follow. I have to admit, as I get older, my ability to diversify my focus is just not good. And what my guests are always saying is I find to be so interesting and really thought-provoking, and Dan is certainly doing that right now. So I just want to, out of respect for the guest, I want to be able to focus more on what he's saying. So let me post a link here. I'm going to remove some stuff from the screen share option. So I don't know if you want to keep yours up or if you want to pull it off. Yeah, that might be, stop that. Okay, that'll free things up so I can see if anybody wants to join the conversation. The link is posted in the chat. I'd love for you guys to join and ask your questions. And again, we can talk about anything you guys like. My guest is very intelligent. He does his own show. I believe it's every 5 days, and he's been at this for, I guess, a couple of years now, if I heard you correctly the other day. So he's capable of talking about a lot of different topics. And so bring whatever questions you have to the table. Yeah, I do think that one of the things that you mentioned is, that's true when it comes to like the organization that I worked with, helping the homeless military veterans with transitional housing. Duck, it's so good to see. I didn't even know you were in the chat. I didn't see you pop up there. It's so good to see. Yeah. Most of the resources actually did come from donations, actually. So that's true. People do actually tend to donate to certain organizations and stuff like that. In fact, I think it was like 80-90% of our annual budget was filled from private donations. All the food we provided to the veterans, because we provided transitional housing. So we actually fed them. We had a kitchen and a dining room down there. We fed them 3 meals a day. And it was also open to military veterans and their immediate families. So sometimes we'd have them, their spouse and their children and stuff like that. And we were able to feed everybody. We had an abundance of food, and it was all donated from.
Is that you, OE? Are you a veteran or something? And is that a cause that?
No, okay, cool. I'm just a street thug. I'm just a self-made man. Yeah, it's just a self-made man at this point. But no, I spent my time running from cops and banging strippers when I should have been serving my country, doing more productive things with my life. So fortunately, I've turned things around. But no, I do have a great deal of respect, though, for military veterans. And I've put a lot of time into trying to support them, because I do think that the people who are willing to defend the country deserve a great deal of our appreciation, our gratitude. I mean, people do it maybe for different motives that I may not agree with. I do think there are some people out there that just want to have a machine gun and whatever. But I think for the most part, the intentions are they want to defend something they believe and they value, which is this country. And I do very much value living in a country where I feel safe. I do not worry about people landing on our shores and trying to, invade our country. I think that the chances of that happening are very, very slim. We have more concerns with terrorist attacks or bombs, missiles coming over or something like that in a desperate situation. But I don't think we have to worry about being invaded. I think our military is a huge reason for that. So I'm very grateful to these people. And Deck, did you have anything in particular you wanted to ask while you've got Dan here available to you?
Yeah. Hey, Dan, sorry. I didn't mean to come with a suit or anything like that. I just finished live streaming, and literally your video is the first one on my algorithm when I got off the live. So, yeah, I mean, so I studied political theory when I was in college. And so one thing I don't totally understand is, there seems to be like a perennial truth or something that we keep reaching where, people seem apt to define a term like justice in a way that makes sense to a lot of people. Because justice so often appeals to things that are not about like what an individual is. And so I always find it a little strange when sort of Randian thought kind of keeps coming around to this objectivism, to this sort of contractual sort of nature and basis of things, based on human reason, when it seems human reason naturally leads us to sort of describe both an individual and the tribe together. And so do you believe that objectivism supports, or do you believe objectivism supports sort of an understandable notion of justice for anyone?
Yeah, definitely. The way I understand justice, following Rand's understanding, is rationality in the evaluation of people. That's actually the formulation that's used in a book about objectivism. The word men is used. Rationality in the evaluation of men, but that's a generic sense of man, not just males, but any human being. So it's in my interest.
And sorry, Dan, is that like human nature, or is this like a naturalistic understanding of human nature? Is this a scientific constructed social understanding? Because there isn't such a thing as just like and I know we weren't that granular to be good faith and charitable, but there isn't just such a thing as a people or a person, particular or category of people. This is all kind of stuff that to me is a little reaching. So do you mind clarifying that point?
I'm not sure what you think is reaching.
Yeah, the fact that there's no such thing as, if we use human reason to understand people, what is in what sense, right? And so are we supposed to use reason pertaining to a natural worldview, human nature, is it just everything? Like, what does it mean? I guess it doesn't seem clear. It seems very like vague to me. Like I would need my own spectacles to really study that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I formulate it is kind of very abstract, so I can try to concretize it to make it more clear what I mean. Rationality in the evaluation of people. So let's say you do something that's I judge as bad. I don't know. You murder somebody, and I don't want.
I do, yeah. Maybe I do.
Let's say that happens hypothetically. Now, what would it be rational for me to do in that case? And if I'm evaluating you, well, I don't want you to murder me. I don't want you to murder other innocent people. So I'm going to advocate for you to be locked up in jail and punished. That would be rationality in this case. Now, let's say you're not a murderer.
But that's already problematic, right? Because you're saying I need to be locked up and punished, right? Those are two different things.
Well, I know that there are different motivations given for imprisoning people, and there's retributive theories of justice, and there are I don't know what the others are called, deterrence theories, like a
restorative deterrence. There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot, and they're typically all under a jurisprudence or something in that sense. Okay. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I think there is a role for punishment, and I guess I don't see that as separate from deterrence. I think it does have a deterrence value. I don't know if you do see them as separate, but I do think there's a role for punishment and for deterrence. And I think a rational person would imprison a rational society.
They would object to that, right?
What's that?
They'd object to that. Yeah,
a rational person would object to.
A rational person would object to someone casually creating justifications post hoc for saying we ought to punish people after they've been locked up, right? So I am saying no gulags, right? I'm saying no gulags, so I would rationally object to what you just said.
Okay, well, I'm not advocating for gulags. I mean, if we're understanding gulags as a place you send like political opponents who oppose Stalin or something. I mean, if you have because these are innocent people who haven't been violent criminals. That's right. At least how I'm understanding the people who are sent to the gulags. But if we're talking about an actual murderer, um, like, I don't know, Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer or someone,
Of course.
serial
Yes,
killer,
sir.
then I think it would be rational to lock up that sort of individual, and irrational not to, because of, well, for self-interested reasons. I think it's in my interest not to have murderers running around the streets. And I think it's in every rational individual's interest to not have murderers running around the streets. So in this particular example, I think justice would be served, rationality would be served by locking up murderers as well as robbers, rapists. And, depending on the degree of the crime, you could have shorter or longer sentences. Yeah.
And so this is maybe one point where our approach creates a more substantial difference, because I actually see it as within my interest, and it's a very interesting topic to me. And so I would see it as within my interest that the polity, or our society in general, limits the role of people's subjective opinions, because I don't want someone a priori. It's not my job to say, like, we need to lock someone up, right? I don't need normative connotations involved in jurisprudence. I don't need normative connotations involved with whatever sense of reciprocity or justice is involved in criminal justice. And so so as a rational person, I just think, well, this is one of those things outside the scope of human rationality, because you can toil and toil and toil, but other people are as well, right? And so we agree that you can be both strong and firm, as well as maybe a little bit harsh, but it is not society's role to go beyond that, right? And this doesn't really owe that much to like reason or objectivism at all. Does it make sense a little bit?
I'm not sure I totally got your points. But one point you were making is that you would object. Well,
hey, I'm gonna flip my Dan. I'm gonna take my my name's Nathan, by the way. I go by Duck Online, but I'm gonna just flip my camera off real quick.
Okay. So you mentioned bringing subjective opinions into the law, and you object to that. I think I would agree with that, although maybe I'm understanding that differently than you are. But I'm talking about things that I don't think are subjective. Like if someone is a murderer, let's say we've got videotape evidence of it, and maybe it's even caught on camera. And so it's not like my subjective opinion that someone is a murderer, or my subjective opinion it's good to lock up murderers. I think that can be defended. I think that's a very defensible opinion.
Dan, you would have to respond then when we have footage out of Minneapolis of what looks like something that should go through the court system, perhaps with both Renee Goods and Alex Peretti's shooting. And so I think what you're saying here isn't philosophically wrong. I think it's also factually wrong. How will you answer or solve for that?
Well, I was just talking in hypotheticals. I wasn't talking about Renee Good or a particular case that actually happened. I'm just saying, let's talk about a case where someone is actually a murderer and we lock that person up. I don't think there's anything subjective about that. I mean, unless, I don't know if you're a kind of skeptic and you think we can never rightfully determine that someone is a murderer. We talk about.
I would know what you mean. I would know what you mean as to like what your point is, or competitively what the outcome is when someone is actually locked up and there's chalk lines, right? But I wouldn't know pertaining to justice or what I think of as maybe civility, discourse, or like even legal principles within jurisprudence. So I'm throwing a lot out at you, and I know that's maybe disrespectful or rude. But I wouldn't know what you mean. I would just know what your point is.
You wouldn't know what I mean by justice?
I wouldn't. If you just say, well, if you murder someone, we lock them up. I mean, we just had some guy in Texas who was exonerated from death row after 25 years. And so for people that want to punish people, death row sentences are a way for that person to suffer and rot in a jail cell. And for people who oppose the death penalty, often these long waiting periods are part of due process, because it's not just that the death penalty is unjust, it's also unreversible. And so I don't think you're solving for justice, and you're not solving for justice is what the fact would say.
Let's take a hypothetical case where there's no doubt that someone is a murderer. What should be done in that case? Or should anything be done on your view?
Wait, what's the hypothetical?
Someone is a murderer. Maybe he even confesses. He says, yep, I committed the murder.
Yeah. So we have both. So I have eyewitness video and he confesses. Maybe he gives his motivations. He sort of gives his life story. And so we know the sort of sum total circumstances of, if this was a sort of act of passion or if this was planned, premeditated sort of, violence a violent act in society. And so, yeah, that person should be in jail, right? I don't disagree with anything in that case. And they should probably have a long sentence. And in most cases, there should be at least a lot of transparency if they have a parole date.
Okay. So I think in this case, we would agree that the person should be locked up at least for some amount of time, and that it would be rational to do that. And I think it would also be just to do that. And it would be irrational.
But you said earlier you wanted to punish people, though. So where'd that go?
Well, I think that would be part of it.
Where'd that go?
That would be part
though,
of my
Dan?
reason. What's that?
Where'd that go? So you are punished. Okay, so what do we agree about then? You said we agree. There's no problem. But I'm not a wise guy, right? Like, where did that? What does Ayn Rand say about punishing someone, punishing an individual based on a personal judgment?
Well,
hey, Dan.
I think did someone else just try to jump in?
Oh, this was Jason. How you doing?
Oh, hi, Jason.
I just want to say hello.
He's been on my channel many times.
Yeah. I'm an objectivist too. Ask me if you have any questions. I just want to say hello.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Hi, Jason.
And I'm curious. Like again, to sort of bring this back to theory and theory versus sort of the practical truths that we're addressing in people's lives and stuff. I'm curious how Ayn Rand handles that situation where we can see human reason leads people to be cruel, to commit injustices. To me, that's something that we solve by not giving everything to sort of individual judgments. Is that not right?
Well, I think you might be raising a different issue there. I'd like to go back to the prior points about punishments. I
Sure.
don't think that's so I'm not saying we agree on everything, but I'm saying we agreed on something, namely that the person should be locked up, and maybe also that it's rational to do that and just to do that. And by implication, it would be irrational not to lock them up and unjust not to lock them up. And
well, we still don't. But I mean, not to be again. I just want to, because someone might be thinking this in chat, that I did have a substantive disagreement about the term locked up. I believe you were being normative in your usage, which again, I don't think is, if that's part of objectivism, that's fine. But, we don't necessarily agree about, if we define what internment is, we might also disagree about that. So.
Well, I don't know what normative or meaning you think is being like imported into the term locked up. I'm just meaning someone is put in jail. And if you want me to say put in jail, I can say that. If you
it's internment. Yeah, internment is I believe what your court paperwork would say is that you're being interned for this long. And so, that kind of tells you I believe initially where you're going, how long you're going to be there. As well as any other court mandated requirements regarding fines, payments, and if the court orders certain classes, or that you have access to like resources like a penal system, sort of psychologist, that would all be included in what I think of as an internment.
Okay, we can call it internment.
Can I ask a question to the question asker? I mean, there are ways to punish people that may not be criminal, right? I could punish a child's an easy example, but I could punish you and not let you back into my bar, for example, if you misbehave. You don't have any problem with those types of punishments. Or I could punish you any number of ways. I could sue you if you did something to cause me to come to your place. And I think it's not just enough the damages, but I have a little bit extra. So I don't have any problem with punishment in a non-criminal sense, but it was a person.
Yeah, if you're talking about whether it's a disincentive structure or it goes beyond that, you feel you need force, you need a lever of force, which is what a punishment is, not related to incentives, but related to human psychology.
Retaliatory. It's retaliatory force as opposed to the initiation of force.
Yeah. So if you want, if you want to commit revenge versus protect your business, I'm sure there is in any system of law.
I don't want an eye for an eye. I want justice. You misbehave somewhere.
Okay, that's your own. That's your subjective. So that would be your subjective definition. And no, at that point, that is your subjective definition, sir.
That's my property, and you misbehaved there, and you're not coming back. Or I don't want to deal with you anymore.
That has nothing to do with your property, right? That's your psychology, sir.
What's my objective? Well, I guess you say it's an objective. I think it's an objective punishment, and it's justice. But
okay, and that's what subjective means, is that you think that, right?
No,
we agree. We don't agree on that, or we do agree on that.
That which is good for my life. So that which is good for your life. That which is good for my life is objective.
I thought you said it was ripped from my life.
No, that which is good. That what is good for my life. So
you don't believe? Okay, so you don't believe justice is ripping something from someone else's life.
Justice is fine to. I don't know. I don't know. Rip what?
I don't know. You said it.
If I rip you from my life because I. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. I said that just objectivism is that which is good for my life. That's objective. If it's good for my life, it's objective.
Okay, and so my sense of justice then, if I think someone says, "Sir, I'm going to rip something from your life," then, sir, you would probably admit or agree that that I can say it's unjust to do so, and so there should be justice for ripping something in a punitive sense from someone else's life.
If we live in a civil society, we have laws to protect that. That's what we want, or that's what we're talking about in an abstract. Right. So we'd have that.
Yes,
so to
sir.
Take my property by force, take my property or family by force would be an injustice towards me. It wouldn't be subjective. It would be an injustice towards me. Now, if some crazy person thought he had justice in taking that which was mine or entering my property after I trespassed him for any reason, frankly, that person would be, I guess we'd say, violating my rights. And if we weren't in the jungle, I'd be seeking a civil system to try and correct that.
Of course, no,
right?
Of course. We have. I don't think we have many substantive disagreements about that, sir.
Okay, I'll let you get back to Dan. I just didn't understand where we're going.
Before we, this is interesting, and I don't want to just completely derail it, but I don't want to leave everybody just out in the cold either. I know Chris has been here for a minute, and Steven, I also know you had joined. So give me just a second to welcome everybody. Does anybody have a comment that they wanted to introduce, or Dan, do you want to continue to address what Dux is talking about? I think that the justice concept is very interesting to me because I look more Aristotelian golden mean, so the virtues of justice. So we look at what is justice is treating like cases alike, first of all, right? The punishment fits the crime, and we look at the golden mean of between excess and deprivation, right? So we're looking for that perfect middle ground, something. So justice would be in between revenge and unwarranted mercy, for example. So I think this would be how I would come to an understanding of justice using this system. But I'm curious, so think about that for a second. Let me let Chris, if he has something to say, and then Steven, if you have something to say, and then we can go around the room and let everybody have a turn just to kind of keep it organized and keep everybody involved. So Chris, do you want to comment?
Well, for me, it's more about the misconceptions and the holes of the argument of basically of the opinions of Rand's welfare state, where basically of Rand's opinions, and that you're piggybacking off of Dan's piggybacking off of like the quote unquote welfare state that essentially that don't want to, well, basically because of the rugged libertarian hyper individualism, or even social Darwinism that's basically implied here. But that's basically, for me, from a standpoint of a Canadian and also a person with a permanent disability. So I don't know if you guys want to go dive into this, but that's where I'm basically coming from, of like why I jumped on.
I'll dive into it a little bit. Do you expect that the welfare seat to be there forever and always for all future generations, or is it something that exists now to help people? Could we not outthink that as a bit and be a better people, say in 50 years, or will we always have to?
Well, if you account for not just me, but the research and development of, say, cancer and in 99 of the diseases, it's essentially, sorry, what I'm saying is that it is necessary to have those system in place. And I could say that you can go walk in to the ER just like for whatever reason, and basically you doctor's saying, okay, you have 6 months to live. Too bad. That's basically, that's what the, like, the logical extreme of what Ayn Rand's philosophy and savoir is.
I wouldn't summarize it like that. I think we'd find other options to get solutions, and you could take the time to do that. So I don't know.
Well,
we'll leave that for others.
Okay. For me, it's basically the rugged individualism and social Darwinism that you're proposing. And I strongly disagree about that, because otherwise, and also it's not just the extreme cases, it's just the stress relief that the having a universal health care brings you. That the stress of not stressing over to delay medical care for a doctor or whatever professional help that you need, that takes care off of it. And
Fair
then
enough.
there's other things, but there's a million other things, but still, it's just basically as a preventative care, and not just the, oh my god, and it's like a worst case scenario.
I lived in Europe for 30 years, not to interrupt, but I lived in Europe for 30 years and under it, and I contributed greatly to it through my paycheck and my employer's contribution.
Yeah, through taxes, yes, but
it was a 6% or so, and then it was matched by my employer by a certain amount, and it was a lot of money for what I got. But I'm glad some people got to use it. I'm just saying I'm familiar with it.
But anyway, it's just that the Ayn Rand philosophy is, I shouldn't pay this, so that essentially you're asking people to die because of, it's everybody else, everybody for himself.
I don't know that follows necessarily, but maybe Dan can explain it philosophically. I'm a bar owner, and I didn't fancy schooling on Ayn Rand. I just read the books on the train and learned what I could. Maybe Dan can explain.
I've been in the bar business many years, brother, and I tell you, you can learn a lot of real life experiences. It's just that's an industry that you can actually get a great deal of exposure to how the real world works. There's no doubt about that. And I would like to hear Dan as the featured guest. Do you have any insight into what Chris is talking about here with the social Darwinism, etc.?
Yeah, I think social Darwinism is probably a very different sort of view than Rand upholds. She's often smeared and called many things that she's not. So if you think of social Darwinism as this dog eat dog sort of view, and you have some people, strongest survival of the fittest or the strongest, and you have the strong trampling over the weak, that's completely a distortion of Rand's view. I mean, her view is one on which individuals' rights are upheld, and no one can violate the rights of anyone else by using coercion against other individuals. If you want something from another individual, you have to ask for it voluntarily, and you can request charity, but you can't use a gun to get what you want. So I think it might be the opposite of a social Darwinist system. You mentioned you have a disability, and wish you the best with that. Now, I wonder what you think is the best way to deal with that. Do you feel better about asking someone for help, or putting a gun in their face and demanding their help under threat of, they're going to be hauled off to jail if they don't? Because that's what it comes down to.
Well,
personally, I'll only speak for myself. If I'm in a very rough spot, I would rather ask people for voluntary assistance than try to coerce it out of them.
Well, I never put like a gun into somebody's head over it.
Well, you rely on the government, which essentially is doing that. Because if you don't pay your taxes, which ultimately end up supporting,
I pay my taxes too.
Yeah, so everyone, we're all forced into this collective system together. We're all pointing guns at each other to a certain extent, and if you don't participate in that system, you get hauled off to jail by people with guns. So we are all part of the system, and I think that's a bad thing. Just because we're forced to be part of it doesn't mean it's a good thing, and that we're all forced to be slaves to a very small extent, at least. I think it's better if people are free as individuals to decide how they will use their own property, and that way everyone's rights are respected. And I think there's more benevolence towards each other if we're doing it out of goodwill rather than out of being coerced.
Okay. I don't need to worry about deductions, copays, and all that garbage that, in my point of view, is the United States when it comes to healthcare. I don't need to stress over it. I do not need to just, like I said, it's just, I don't have those stresses hanging over my head, because, having what I'm saying is that the healthcare that I do receive is not the quote unquote gun into my head because I cannot pay for it. I don't need, neither does my neighbor, neither does anybody else the streets. Usually, as a figure of speech, I don't really need to fear about those type of things. And if you think that paying taxes is putting a gun over your head, that's probably you'll justify it what put in my mouth as in necessary evil. I would say it's something that is more of I think it's more of it's that when your worst day will come, would you be denied care simply because you cannot pay? And maybe you can die or be more crippled than what you were because you cannot afford those. Those are the questions I'm asking. Either way, I'm not basically a healthcare professional within my country. I'm just saying that a lot of things that happen in my life would not be possible if it would be a dog-eat-dog world, whether it be social Darwinism, that I really think that's what Ayn Rand is, or her own so what quote-unquote philosophy. So that's what I got to say.
Chris, this medium we're using to talk right now is a result of a dog-eat-dog world, right? That ended long-distance bills as we knew it, saved a lot on paper and trees cutting down with the internet. A lot of things came from that. I just want to point out, I don't know if the cure for cancer might be a race for something dog-eat-doggish.
Well,
I want Dan to be able to respond to this, and then I want to involve Stephen in the conversation as well. He hasn't had a
Anyway.
chance to speak. So Dan, why don't you have the last response, and then we'll go around the room and keep everybody involved here.
Okay. Well, you started off by saying you like that you don't have to worry about all this garbage. And I think it's important to look beyond your own situation and realize the garbage that you might be indirectly relying on that other people have to deal with in order to spare you some of the hassle of having to care for your own life. So I don't think it's anyone else's responsibility to do what you need to do to survive. Like, you might think having to go to work and is garbage. I've heard some socialists say that. Like, why shouldn't I be able to just stay at home and play video games all day? Why shouldn't work be an option? Well, it actually is an option, but then you have to deal with the consequences of that.
You're
Like,
not
you could try
living
to
my life. Just to let you know, you're not living my life. So
yeah, and you're not living my life either.
so I don't know
Well,
why
well,
you
Chris,
would
don't take
say
it
those.
No, don't
things,
take it
but
personally,
anyway,
because
sorry.
he's not addressing you personally. He's addressing the generic, mindset of a group of people or individuals within a group of people. But he's not attacking you personally. So don't take it personal, because he's attacking the idea, not you personally. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that I want to say much more right now. I'll just say that if the responsibilities of life, I don't think should be regarded as garbage. I think that's just part of the price. And maybe Chris didn't mean that, but the fact that we need to work in order to support ourselves is just a fact of life. And many people love their work, and I think ideally they should try to find a job that they do love. Like, that's something I strive to do. I haven't always loved the kind of things I need to do, but I recognize that it's my responsibility to support myself, and I shouldn't rely on others, either directly or indirectly through the government, to support me. My life is my responsibility. So I'll stop there.
I do think there is a lot to be said for taking responsibility for ourselves. I also think there's a lot to be said for helping people who can't help themselves for various reasons. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. Stephen, you've been here for a while and haven't had a chance to contribute. Did you have a particular, you want to talk about this, or have something you wanted to bring up? And then we'll go ahead and work our way around the room. I do want to say something about the prison system and the incarceration that Dux and Dan were talking about earlier. So I'll wait till after you speak.
Cheers, mate. Yeah, I'm also interested. That's kind of why I came on, to hear Dan and Duck flesh out what they were talking about earlier. So I hope they go back to that. And Dan, thank you for your presentation. I've read The Fountainhead, read a couple of Rand's essays, and some of Atlas. So I wouldn't say I'm overly familiar, but what I have read and seen of Ayn Rand is really quite interesting, and I like it. She's got it's a good, yeah. From what I've seen, it looks like a very what would I say? Good is a terrible word, but it's a good worldview. Sorry to be, that's a horrible word to use in this discussion. But there it is. Yeah. But yeah, I hope that Dan and Duck go back to what they were talking about. But I just want to say a couple of things. Objective Ethics, thank you for getting me up on Sarah's panel yesterday. I don't have a camera attached, and you said you knew me, so I appreciate that.
Cheers, yeah, I was actually surprised that she allowed me to vouch for anybody, because that's the first time I've been on her show. Right. And I was even surprised that she hosted that debate, because I'm really a nobody. And when Mark had challenged me, he offered me the challenge. I was really grateful to Mark, because he's way, as you saw from the debate, he's way out of my league. He really beat me down pretty bad, but it was a really good learning experience for me. And I really appreciated the opportunity and the exposure. I gained almost 10 followers, subscribers to my channel just from that one situation. So, which for a small channel like mine, just getting started for one show, that's a huge boost. And so I was just so grateful for that. But she did make me send her videos of previous debates that I had done, just before she would even allow me to consider to allow me to be on there. So she runs a pretty tight ship there. And I was really pleased that she did let you on. I was surprised that she did that based on my referral. So I was grateful. And you handled yourself, as always, like a gentleman and a professional. And you had a lot of really great contributions to that conversation. Another thing that shocked me, I'm not trying to derail here to last night's debate, but I was shocked that so many of the people, especially initially, that joined that conversation were from my channel. Because I have such a small number of followers. I couldn't believe, with the hundreds, actually thousands probably, of followers that she has, that most of the people were coming from my channel. So as the night went on, more of her followers did join, and the show went for, I guess, over 7 hours. I had to dip out after like the 5-hour mark or something. I just couldn't keep up. My wife was calling me to dinner for over an hour. She was getting pretty upset with me, but it was just so fascinating to get the different points of view. I really appreciated that. And oh, here we go. Let me get I don't know who this.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Here's another.
It was fun. It was fun. I was fun watching you smack down on what's his face on Mark Reed a little bit. Mark's such a, like you said, I think you said this. Mark's such a strong debater, so it's kind of fun to see a lot of his points get kind of wrapped up that night.
I appreciate I appreciate those comments. I actually did not do nearly as good a job as I could have or should have done. Frankly, I was feeling really under the weather, and I also lost because I was so ill. I don't know what the hell I did, but I had a whole page of notes specifically on how I wanted to attack the is-ought problem. And I guess my cloud disabled itself and I didn't realize it. So it did not auto save. So when I shut everything down before the debate and I opened it back up, that was just gone. And I didn't want to try and fumble through that from memory because I felt like I was just going to embarrass myself. You know what I mean? I just wanted to stick with what I had written down. And so I could have done a significantly better job than I did, but I felt that, I presented a strong argument in my opening, and Mark, he avoided it, and I did not press him on it. I really tried to come with his argument, and that was to my detriment. And the other thing that I was disappointed in, I'm really grateful for Sarah for hosting that, but the one thing that I was really disappointed in every debate that I've done, which is only a handful, and every debate that I've ever watched, the person who opens gets the first word, right? The affirmative, but the person who is taking the second position, the negative, they get the last word. And that makes it an even challenge. But to give Mark the opening and the closing, I felt like really was at such a disadvantage to myself.
Oh, no, that's normal rules. That's normal Oxford rules.
Oh, is that the specific setup?
Yeah,
I know there's multiple types of formats that people use, and I'd never seen that format before. So if I'd have known that, because Mark and he actually agreed to go with the format that I had used and the same proposition in my previous debate, because I had a debate with an atheist on that same topic, and I did much better. In fact, AI said that I won that previous debate, but my opponent was not nearly as strong as Mark. But Mark agreed to use the same format. And so that's what we had sent in. And Sarah didn't tell me that she was going to do a different format until like a day before the debate, or 2 days. And I had
Can I ask you, OE, how long have you known that Mark Reed subscribes to this anti-real or subjective sense of morality? I was surprised. I thought this whole time he believed in objective morality, to be totally honest.
He has the meta-ethic concept. So it's kind of a little bit in between, because of his meta-ethic principle. And he did actually agree in the debate, which I felt was a bit of a victory on my part, where he kind of did agree that if you can establish this certain standard, then you can come up to an objective view. But it was clearly he beat me down. But anyway, no, I did appreciate Stephen, your input in the conversation. And I'm sorry to derail from this conversation here and talk about that debate. It was a great experience for me, and I appreciate all the support that I got. And you guys were great for showing up. So I'll
just finish off then before you go back. During your discussion with Dan, you did touch on antinatalism. So I've said to you before, if you ever want to have a chat about that, a more long form discussion, that's kind of my wheelhouse. So I can get into that with you if you want to at some point.
I do want to have a conversation about that. I don't know. And let me just promote it here. I did a video called Courage Without Fear. And if anybody hasn't watched that video yet, I would really appreciate it if you guys would. I'm extremely proud of that video. And it was an attempt to address the problem of suffering and the antinatalist claim. And I feel really good about that video and highlighting the benefit of being able to overcome suffering. And you can't get that benefit if you don't face your hard times, right? And so I'd like to see, if you guys do watch that video, I would encourage you to share it with anybody who you know is suffering from depression or anxiety, and also please leave your own comment in the comment section, not for the algorithm and all that bullshit. I don't care about that. What I really care about is we all have an opportunity to share our own experiences, because everybody's life is important. All of us are equals here, and one person's struggles are not more important than another person's, because it's all relative, right? So every one of us has overcome a difficult time in life. And if you guys are willing to share something, even if it's not a personal story, if you don't feel like you want to expose yourselves like that, something that you've experienced or witnessed, because I've had people already reach out to me and tell me that they've been really uplifted and encouraged by that video and by the comments that have been left. So just want to, Stephen, if you want to have a conversation sometime about that, it's a topic I find quite interesting, the whole antinatalism concept.
Yeah, no worries. And call me Steve, mate. Steve, I'll leave it there.
Okay, very good. And then
is that a picture of Bill Murray in your background, or who is that? No, I'm sorry. That's who I thought it was.
No, it's not Bill.
I do love Bill Murray. What About Bob is so funny. Oh my God, that's one of my favorites. And the Christmas one he does. At any rate, I want to say hi to Nir real quick. And Nir, we're going to get to you just 1 second here. And it's so great to see you again. Thank you for your participation. You also brought some great content, great comments to that conversation last night. I thought it was so nice to have you as part of that. I just want to real quick, before we go too far into it, the prison, because I do have firsthand experience with this from my own struggles and having been locked up before. The privatized, and most prisons, I don't know about most, but there are a lot of privatized prisons, and there's a program. So I'm really big, because I don't believe in free will. I'm really big in focusing on rehabilitation as opposed to just locking people up. I don't think that the prison system we have is effective. I know for a fact that what we're doing is we just make criminals better at being criminals, frankly. And in the system we have right now, I think it's something like 60% of offenders will reoffend within 3 years. 90% will reoffend within 10 years, which is staggering. Those numbers are staggering if you really think about it, right? Prison is supposed to be a situation where people don't want to go, and it's supposed to be a terrible thing. And it is terrible. A lot of stuff that happens in prison is really messed up, believe me. But you can survive it without clicking up and doing the things that you see on TV. I never clicked up. I got along with everybody. In fact, I call people fam. You guys will hear me say that a lot. That actually is a term that I learned in prison, because a lot of the African Americans started calling me fam, because I got along with everybody. I didn't have to, I think one fight I got into, but it was over a food tray, which is fucking ridiculous, but whatever. So yeah, I didn't have to fight my way through prison. Really. I didn't have to get involved in gangs and didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff, because I treated myself with respect. And I treated other people with respect. And so you can get by, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people will get involved in some really nasty stuff in prison. It's just a messed up environment. And we need to change that whole system, because we're not doing the criminals any favor, and we're not doing society any favor with the current system. But we do need to separate people from society. We cannot let criminals just running free. That makes no sense at all. But rehabilitation is important. So one of the ideas that I've always promoted is the idea of having essentially like a work camp type environment, where people will go and learn a trade, be able to live in a community, and actually work while they're there and produce some kind of a good or something like that. They have systems in prison right now where people work for like 50 cents a day. Completely ridiculous. I'm talking about learning an actual trade, learning some skills, getting counseling. And there is a particular organization that I'm aware of where they set something up like this. They had this work camp. And it turns out that what they were doing is, because it was privately owned and they were getting subsidized for each criminal, just like prisons do, they get subsidized for every bed they have filled. The motivation is to fill the beds. And there is a tremendous amount of corruption that happens as a result of that. So the privatized prison system, I'm concerned about. When we motivate people, we incentivize people to fill those beds. It incentivizes people financially to do that. That's what they will do, at least based on what I've seen and experienced myself. So that is my concern with having prisons be privatized. And I don't know how that fits into your capitalist picture, but I did want to just kind of highlight that a little bit. And before you guys deal with that, because I do want to come back, it sounds like everybody wants to hear what Dux and Dan were talking about. Let me hit up Nir.
I'm interested in that too, OE. Objective ethics. I'm interested in that too, because like that seems like an issue where it is simultaneously an expense to taxpayers to say that the prison system doesn't work, but more so it is I tend to agree with you that it is about justice both for victims as well as people that have been incarcerated. When it's kind of hard to say how someone ended up somewhere. Once you say how someone got in prison, it's hard to say how they got in prison. So that is also, I think, interesting, and it's also directly into Randian philosophy, because how is it the case that someone who is pursuing minimal taxation, minimal government, due to self-interest, can respond accurately to both sides of that equation?
I agree. It is a difficult thing, but I think that if we step back from the situation, the most important thing is we have to remove our emotions. And it's difficult because a lot of us have been infringed upon by a criminal or criminal behavior of some sort or another. And so we have a personal attachment to this. Others, we've been influenced by media and things like that. So it's a difficult conversation to have. But I think if we take a practical, logical view and step back and say, what actually is justice? What is the end goal? What's justice? As you said, and I agree to 100%, we have justice for both people. The criminal themselves,
Yeah.
so much of their environment affects the choice that they make. I'm a soft determinist, so I'm really hammered down on that point. But even if we took a free will,
what does that mean? What does that mean that you're a soft determinist? You're a soft determinist. What do I care about that? Like, what is that actually?
So, because I do believe, as opposed to free will, before we get too far into that, let me give Nir a chance to say hello. And did you have something you wanted to talk about or mention, or something you wanted to bring into the conversation? Then we're going to work our way around the room.
Yeah, sure. I want to say that you guys did a great job, and I do think that Mark was a bit stronger in his point of view. And I think I'm not sure what the other gentleman was saying about Mark being objective. He was clear from the very beginning that he supports subjective morality, even though I disagree with it. But he was very clear in his ideas, and I think that he was also clear in terms of what the objective morality.
What happened?
We spoke about it before, and I remember. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yes, that was my fault. I was moving my cursor and it was on you, and it took you off the screen for a second, but it was just for a brief second. You're back. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed.
Someone else just left as well by the looks of things. I don't know
by
if it
their
was
own volition. I think I didn't actually do that.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So I think that when I spoke to you, objective ethics, I remember when we were talking on Free for Talk, I think I made that point that either that atheists would, not an atheist, but the Mark, either he would use to make a claim that what you're saying is not objective morality, is subjective, and that's exactly what he did. And that's what the whole debate, he was trying to understand where your claim is about objective morality, and he was trying to find that. And I think even in the comment sections, talking to other people, I think that they didn't understand. They didn't get it, like where you're grounding your objective morality. But not that being said, I think that you did made a good argument. But the idea is, I feel like Mark, he picked up on that. He when you were making, he was saying that this is still the subjective morality. And but overall, I think the debate was great, and I think that even though I disagree with Mark about subjective reality, and there were some other subjective morality, I think there were other people that also disagreed with him, and I think that he doesn't understand the importance of objective morality, which you do. I feel like you understand the importance of objective morality, but he doesn't. But he understands what it is, but he knows that he's not agreeing to it. He's just following on subjective morality. But overall, I thought it was a great debate. And I had the sense that what we discussed, I feel like that would be something that he would, pick up on, and he will try to, corner you in with those questions, which I think that he ended up doing. Yeah.
Yeah, he never really addressed the syllogism, the argument from reason. He actually never really did directly, and I lost my notes on how I wanted to go about dealing with the guillotine, because there is actually Richard Carrier had actually just broken this down in a previous debate back he had in November, and about how to attack the is-ought problem, because he also is believes in objective morality, and that came up in his debate. And he has, Richard Carrier is a brilliant guy. I know a lot of people give him shit because he's what do you call it? He doesn't believe a mythicist, right? He doesn't believe the historical Jesus, and that's definitely an outlier position. I have my own views on that, but that's a separate conversation. So I love Carrier takes a lot of grief, but I find Carrier to be quite brilliant. And he did a great job. And I had a lot of notes ready for that argument, and I just lost them. And I wasn't with the cold medicine that I decided to take, which was not a good idea, because the only stuff I have here is for nighttime. So I don't know if you could tell or not, but I was a little bit out of it, almost inebriated to a certain degree. I was I did a lot better in the open conversation, frankly, than I did in the debate, because that medicine was starting to wear off and I was starting to become more alert, which is funny because when Sarah asked if I would stick around for a couple hours to do the open conversation, I told her, I says, I don't know if I really want to do that, because the objective position is generally considered the minority position. And I felt like I was going to be having to field a lot of questions. And I've been involved in these conversations before where I'm the only agnostic in a room full of theists, and everybody is coming. Like, I remember I debated, it wasn't a formal debate, but it was a discussion I was having on a friend of mine's channel who's a Christian, and a bunch of Christians. It was like me against 5 Christians, and they were trying to debate the flood myth. And as a boat manufacturer myself, I know there was no global flood. There was no magic zoo boat with a bunch of animals floating around. I absolutely could guarantee that did not happen. Not to mention every field of science has thoroughly debunked that whole nonsense. But I've got 5 different or 6 different Christians all debating me from different points of view. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the hydroplate theory, which is completely nonsensical, but I've got half of them are arguing the hydroplate theory. The other half of them are arguing from a completely different theory. There's biblical literalists. I mean, it's so difficult when you're getting arguments that are disjointed. They're all coming at you. And so I was really concerned about that after the debate, but I actually did very well. I felt like in that particular conversation, I felt like better than in the debate itself, because I was starting to become more alert. But overall, I appreciate the kind words. Mark kicked my ass all over the place, and I knew he would. I told everybody before that debate, he has so much experience. He's a smart guy. And I knew he would beat me, and it would be a good learning experience for me. And so I'm not surprised by the outcome of all that, but I thought it was a good debate because the number one thing is that I think we both were relatively intelligent. Obviously, Mark, extremely intelligent, but I think I did present enough of a good argument. But we were very polite. There was no ad hominem, no personal attacks. It didn't get emotional. And so much when I see debates online, so much of energy is wasted on just yelling at people and disrespecting people and stuff. And I just find that to be so unproductive, because it distracts from the actual content of what you're there for, which is to get the information. So I thought we did a good job in that regard. Did you have anything you wanted to mention to our guest, Dan, as an Ayn Rand proponent in particular?
No, I mean, I was, again, I think that a lot of people were with you for that debate about the idea of objective morality. And that's why a lot of people were asking Mark a lot of these questions on his position. And a lot of people sort of disagreed on the subjective morality. But in terms of like Ayn Rand, I don't know much about it, and I don't know what you guys are discussing relates to that. But yeah, I'm not sure what you guys are discussing relates to Ayn Rand. Yeah.
No worries. So Dux had actually intentionally left. I did not kick him by accident. So it looks like, Dad, did you want to address what he was mentioning, or what we were talking about with the prison system, or did you want to bring up anything else that had been brought up? Because I know Chris Moore had brought up some things he has left of his own volition. I'm not kicking people. When I did accidentally remove for a second, if that was my fault, but I have not removed anybody. They left of their own volition. So did you want to address any of the things that were kind of thrown your way?
Yeah, the private prisons points. So I don't support private prisons. I haven't given this much thought, but it seems like that might properly be a function of the government, since it does involve using force against people. And in that case, there wouldn't be this worry about trying to get more people in prison in order to maximize profits, since it wouldn't be a for-profit venture. So this came up once when you called in to my show, but I wanted to reiterate that point. Also, soft on crime. I think some places, like maybe California, are that way. Like you have these repeat offenders, people who are they go in and out of jail, and they in the last few years, I think some proposition was passed in California that made it such that it's just a misdemeanor rather than a felony, as long as you steal like less than $900 worth of merchandise or something. And I don't remember exactly what the law was, but I think certain places are soft on crime and they encourage more crime, and we need to crack down in some cases. Now, this is not to say there's not a dichotomy here, like either you lock someone up or you rehab them. You could do both. I'm not opposed to also, in addition to locking someone up or interning them, if we want to use a different term, I'm not opposed to also them going through some kind of rehab program. I don't know if that's the state's job itself to do that, or maybe they should contract that out to some private organization who works with them to help rehab people. But I do think it's fine for, and I hope people do improve themselves while they're in jail and make themselves into better people, so that once they get out, they are better people and they can enjoy their own life first and foremost, and also it will contribute to other people's lives going better if they reform themselves while they're in prison. So I'll just make those points for now.
That is interesting. Some things I might comment on that. But Jason, you've been kind of in the back there for a while. Did you want to have anything you wanted to address on these points, or anything at all for that matter?
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit, because it's been a while. One, I wanted to know if you've heard of Michael Leibovitz. He served some time in prison, and he read a lot of Ayn Rand there, and has a unique show and a unique take on things. So his name's Michael Leibovitz. If you have the kind of background or experience, I could talk about my time in jail. It was only one night. I was told to leave a place. I felt like I had a right to be there and engage in commerce, but I was told I was asked to leave, and even I returned. It was a hotel, tried to take a room. They said I was still asked to leave. So I lost that with a suspended sentence. So I do have some sympathy to the experiences that have happened to me, but that's kind of how I administer justice. I learned that somebody's property is their property. And I wanted to clarify with the gentleman when I first chimed in, that there's probably certainly rooms for better collecting of objective evidence and that type of thing, in the courts, or whatever the case was, or those types of things. I didn't know if he had an understanding of private property. I think he did at the end, but we live in a society of private property and laws, so I can use my actions or my boycott or my property to rid something. Maybe there was confusion of something that's mine. I wouldn't go take something that somebody else's. Well, I put a note here. Well, I was going to ask you objective ethics. You had talked about taking care of oneself and also the importance of taking care of others. And then the gentleman from Canada, well, is charity not better as a person? Is it not better for me? Is this not part of objective? I think objective and ethics. Objective, that's what's good for me in my life. That's how I take it. And ethics being some morality that I'd want to give. It'd be better for me to give voluntarily than to be taxed. And maybe take some time to get there, but aren't we a better people if I were to take care of people without a tax, but through the actions of charity? Or I've heard socialists argue the word charity shouldn't exist. They want to abolish it. It just shouldn't be a concept anymore. You're just taxed. I didn't quite get their argument. I shouldn't make it for them. And with that, I'll let you guys reply in whichever way you wish.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate you joining the conversation. It's so nice to have you. I've engaged with you a little bit in chats on Dan's channel. So it's such a pleasure to have you stop by and actually be able to articulate your thoughts in person. It's always easier. The chat here, you're limited to just a few lines at a time. And some of these things, these topics actually get pretty deep, and they're worth exploring deep, further. So it's really nice to have you stop by. I do think, so my view of objective is actually different. Dan and I were discussing that earlier. I actually think of objective as being stance independent. So as Dan defined it, that's more of a metaphysical concept. My throat is this cold. I'm still fighting it, but it's more of a metaphysical concept. So stance independent. Some people think of it mind independent. So I make the argument for objective morality coming from the position that we're all agents. It's a inherent part of humanity that agency means we set goals and take actions. And so this puts us all on an even playing field. And because we're on an even playing field, I think we can establish a certain right to freedom and well-being, because we need that freedom and well-being to accomplish our goals, right? And agency means that we're setting goals and taking action. So I build the moral argument up from there that we should not infringe on others' rights. They should not infringe on our rights of freedom and well-being. And so if we all cooperate in this way, then we have an objective standard that we could use to establish morality. And after that, I actually use the virtues to try and determine what is the most moral decision. So justice, mercy, things of this nature, fairness, right? This is how I tend to approach my own ethical system. And I think that justice is a really important part of that. And that's applicable to what we're talking about here with the prison system. I do think, if I could give a nod to if I understood it correctly, to what Dux was saying, is that there are influences, there are reasons that people commit crimes. And I'm not excusing criminal behavior. I didn't excuse it for myself. And that's one of the reasons I'm actually not in prison right now. I was facing 75 years for that high-speed police chase. They were going to give me a measure 11 for every single police officer that was involved, because we went over 100 miles an hour. And so the judge had the prosecuting attorney had determined that I had endangered the lives of every single police officer that was involved. And he was right. I did. That was not only that, but I endangered the lives of every single civilian that, like I told the judge, I says, I realize how foolish that was, because somebody could have been out there walking their dog, or who knows what. I mean, it could have been so catastrophic. And I'm still to this day so grateful that no property was damaged and nobody was injured, because it could have gone so bad. I mean, I just really, so I'm not excusing behavior from criminals, my own or anybody else's. Okay. I think that we do, when anybody engages in unlawful activity, they need to be separated from society, so I think that's really important. But there are reasons that people commit these crimes. And we know Dan and I were talking earlier about legalization of drugs, for example, right? And I mentioned about why people are using these drugs. And I think there's a reason why people actually put poison into their bodies, because that's what this stuff is. It's poison. And most rational, sane human beings who have a healthy mindset and are healthy emotionally would not go drink battery acid or something like this, because we don't want to poison ourselves actively or knowingly, right? But although people do eat a lot of fast food and stuff, so I don't know, maybe people do like poisoning themselves. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems to me that it's counterintuitive to wanting to live a good life. We want to live our best life. We want to be healthy. We want to have longevity. So why do so many people use these drugs? Why are people? Well, there's a reason for it. And I think the same thing with criminal behavior in general. There's a lot of influences from the environment that these criminals find themselves in. A lot of them are born into low-income families, and these don't excuse the behavior. It's not to say we don't punish these people because they committed a crime just because they came from a poor neighborhood or whatever, but we have to look at the cause, right? There's a cause and effect, a chain of cause and effect here that's real and tangible, and we can look at it and observe it, and we can, to the degree that it's predictable, right? And so because of that, I think we need to have if we care about actually fixing the system, we need to take all these things into account. But I do think that we need to separate people, and I think it's really important. But the statement of they can rehabilitate themselves, and I'm not trying to paraphrase you too critically there, Dan, when you said that, so correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounded like that, kind of like they can rehabilitate themselves. I don't. If they had the ability to rehabilitate themselves, I mean, there is a certain agency or onus on the individual. Like I've told people before, yeah, you've got to put the work in. I've turned my life around to being a street kid and a thug, working in the adult industry, high-speed police chases. I completely turned my life around to where I'm a successful business owner. I've got patents. I'm a licensed boat manufacturer with the U.S. Coast Guard. All that took my own hard work. But without a system around me, without some kind of support, it never would have happened. People can't just do it themselves. While they do have to put in the work, you've got to have the right support system around them. There's got to be certain resources available to them, or it's so impossible to think that it's really going to happen, is how I would answer that. And he left. I don't know if that was addressing what he was saying or not. Dan, did you want to comment on what I just said, or should we move on and see if Jason wants to?
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly how I put it, but I do think people need to reform themselves, but I don't see that as being exclusive to also getting help from others. I think that's fine if there's also help from others. But in either case, I do think it all should be voluntary. So I shouldn't be forced, or no one should be forced through taxation or any other method to fund rehabilitation programs. These should be voluntary programs, but I'm not opposed to there being rehabilitation programs. Just they should be voluntary. That's all.
Yeah, I had a quick story on as a bar owner, real quickly. It might be interesting, but in 2012, we got a bad supply of alcohol into the country, and people died, and they had to emergency stop it. And I think it included more liquors than we had, but I had to close down for I was in Prague, Czech Republic. I had to close down for 14 days and only sell beer and wine. I think actions like that could happen in capitalism. I just wish they wouldn't be, so extreme, because we had nice liquors that were clearly imported, but they banned it all because of some bad labels and some illegal liquors. Things like that can happen, and it just shows the difference of how much they cared about people who want to put booze into their system, as opposed to other drugs that are illegal. They cared enough to close us down.
Yeah, the bar business is a real interesting industry. I'm actually doing a consultation right now as a side project for a startup, and they want to open a gambling hole. And it's an opportunity for me to make good money for just using basically a lot of experience that I've already put the time in. So I have the knowledge that I'm basically selling at that point. But most of the people, as you know, who are in bars, and I don't know where you're at, if they have legalized gambling or not, but where I'm at, we do. It's state run. And most of the people who are in bars consuming alcohol, most of the people who are in bars gambling actually have a problem. And so we're kind of feeding into their problem, which morally it's questionable. I will admit it's not everybody.
I am a peddler. I am a peddler of booze. It's a tiki bar, which I think is kind of parallel to an Irish bar. It's kind of a franchise. I try to have it for people for a nice night. It's a different culture in Europe with drinking, even sometimes for lunch, a beer. It's a very different attitude. And what else? Well, the gambling, actually, they had those fruit machines and gambling machines, actually removed all of that. So I'd say my bar is a product of removing that stuff and making it something nicer. So it had a kind of seedy element to it, and we made it a nice Trader Vic's style cocktail thing that people should go to on a special occasion, throw down some money and have a nice time. But yeah, I get it. We're peddling booze, and people wind up there, and we have to deal with them.
Yeah, it's not all, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I do think that, it's not something I want to do, because I've had so many years in that industry, and a lot of the years were spent in the adult industry. I was working as a bouncer at strip clubs, and then a bartender, and then a general manager, and so on and so forth. So I'm really tainted, because that's just a dark side of the bar business in general, as you can imagine, because you've got the alcohol, the liquor, the gambling, and then you've got the drugs, and you've got the sex. And just what a nightmare. So I'm really, it's tainted my whole thing of it. But
nice thing in Prague, it's liberal like that, and there are other places they can go for all of that, and I send them that way. It's one of the benefits of Europe not turning a blind eye or decriminalizing a lot of that stuff. So I point that out. That's all.
Can I just jump in here, please?
Please do.
Yeah, Dan. I apologize if I'm going to force you to, well, I can't force you, but if I'm going to make you already answer something you've already answered. You talk about the prison system, and you do agree. I think if I'm understanding you correctly, from a Randian perspective, we should be isolating people from society who commit violent crimes, for example. Is that fair? Is that a fair representation of your position? So I'm just wondering, like who I want to bring it back to the taxation idea. My understanding is that part of our taxes pays for that kind of incarceration, but I'm guessing the Randian position is against that, yet we'd like to separate these people from society. I'd just like to get your comments on that. And I apologize if you've already answered it.
No, I don't think that came up before, but even if it did, that's fine, because I know people come and go, and I'm happy to address the same question to different audiences. So governments will be funded by voluntary means. Now, what exactly those means are can vary. And Ayn Rand actually wrote an article called Government Financing in a Free Society. How would it work? How would we fund the government, including the prison system? Although I don't think she mentioned that explicitly, but since we've been talking about it, I wanted to mention that would be something that I think the government would do. So one way is through donations. That's how all the government functions would be funded. Another way is through lotteries. And I believe historically, some governments have and still are funded by lotteries. Like sometimes there are state lottos, and that's a way that states can raise millions or maybe billions of dollars. Ayn Rand discusses another method of funding whereby you can pay the government to enforce contracts. She discusses that at length in her article. So there are and maybe there are dozens of other options you could use. But in one way or another, the prison system would be funded by voluntary means, but not by coercing people under threat of jail if they don't contribute tax money to fund it.
So the name of that essay, just to confirm, Government Financing in a Free Society. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness.
Yeah,
which
yep.
I don't know.
I've read that too. Yeah.
Okay, some of her essays are available for free online.
Yes.
Others you might have to buy the book. But anyway, that's the source of it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dan has been with us for several hours now, and I'm really, really grateful for his time. So I think what I'd like to do is wind this down, because I think what I'd like to do is invite him back because, well, I guess I shouldn't talk about you like you're not here. I'd like to invite you back because, excuse me, my voice is is giving up on me. But I would really like to get into the free will discussion at some point. I think that would be fascinating. So I'll reach out to you. I've got your email, and we can set up a time if you're interested in coming back. You've been a great guest. I know you took a little bit of heat from some of the chat, and that's just the way it goes. You know what I mean? I think you handle it with grace, and I appreciate everyone's contributions, because that is something I do actually promote here, is to be able to challenge each other's ideas. And that goes for my ideas, anybody's ideas. I want people to be able to have respectful disagreements and show people, set an example of how we can treat each other with dignity and maintain our own personal dignity while justifying various arguments and stuff like that, and try to let our logic and reasoning, dictate the outcome of our positions, and not make emotional arguments per se. But sometimes, we have to deal with the emotions because we're human beings. We have emotions, right? Our emotions are linked to our thought processes. It's a whole function of the brain. It's all connected. So we can't just avoid the emotions. So let me go around the room and give everybody a final remark. You can promote anything you'd like, promote your business, promote your channel, whatever projects you're working on. I see you down there, brother. And Dan, we'll have you go last since you're the guest. So let's start with Jason and let you have a final word, and then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll finish up with Dan, and then I'll just do a quick closing. Go ahead, Jason. The floor is yours, brother.
Not much. We're actually going to go to a Mexican restaurant and watch the rest of this show and the football game. So thank you for having me on. Thanks you for listening, and hope I didn't rub too many people the wrong way. It's a long. Objectivism is a long battle. I like to present it as something that has to come over time, and not let people think they're going to be thrown into it tomorrow. It's something that could be talked about a bit, but next time. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your contributions. And I did want to acknowledge something you had asked me. And I agree with you 100%. I think that in theory, if we could give people the option to, contribute to society as opposed to coercion, I think that ideally would be better, right? I agree with that 100% in principle. My skepticism comes from how practical is it, and how, just in general, how effective would it actually be? That's what I'm really skeptical of. But I think that if it's something we could just snap our fingers overnight and say, hey, listen, we're just going to start contributing because it's the right thing to do. We're going to recognize the objective value that every human being inherently holds. And we're going to, I think that absolutely we would support each other if we all took this objective position, whether you take objectivism from Ayn Rand's model or from my model or any other objective model. I think that an objective moral principle does incentivize us to support one another. And I think the subjective morality is problematic because of that, for very thing, frankly. And I think that there are other issues. So I really do want to, acknowledge you, because you did ask me that directly. And I think you're right. I think that ideally it sounds great. It might I'm just skeptical of how practical it would be. But next time you come by, thank you so much. And really enjoyed having you. It's always good to see another fellow bar owner out there. And it's an interesting industry. We could talk about that probably all night sometimes, swap stories. I've got a lot of them. I'm sure you do too.
Oh, thanks.
And Steve, you're up next on the plate. What any final words at all? Whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to bring up. If you've got any projects or anything like that, promotions, promote your stuff. Feel free.
Oh, that's cool. I've got a feeling I'm like an undercover moral anti-realist here. So I'm not sure. I disagree basically. I actually really do disagree fundamentally with your positions. But it's late in the day, so we can get into that another time if you want to. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak, and I like the vibe here. It's really cool. And Dan, thanks again, mate. Interesting stuff, and I will look at a bit more of Rand because of you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure having you stop by, and your feedback is always really appreciated because at the very least, I appreciate when people push me and challenge my ideas because it forces me to think critically. And I think that's one of the skill sets or one of the qualities that people lack. I think that we have a tendency towards groupthink, and I find that to be very dangerous. I did a short video on my own channel talking about this. I call it cognitive ignorance or collective ignorance, because we have this herd mentality. It makes us feel better when we think that our ideas are being accepted. And so there's a natural proclivity that we have to kind of click up or link up with other like-minded people. And unfortunately, what happens is we stop questioning things. We stop questioning our own ideas, right? There's a philosopher, I'm trying to think I can't recall his name, I'm not going to get to it now. But yeah, somebody made a really great quote about this, the fear of Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer had talked about how, people inside of a group, they are afraid to present any idea that goes against what the group is thinking. And the fear does not come from the fact that their idea is going to be accepted or rejected, but the basic basis of the fear is the fact that they are questioning the group itself. That becomes the fear. So people should stop thinking critically. And I find that to be problematic, and I find it to be something that we just see all over the place. So I really do encourage people to push back, and I really respect the fact that you are able to do it in such a polite manner, and you're well spoken, and you're very intelligent. So you're able to offer some really good insight, and it's been such a pleasure having you participate in these conversations. So I'm just really grateful to you. So let me turn this over to Dan. Dan, have any final remarks about this? Anything at all you'd like to discuss? Please do promote your channel, and remember, I will be putting links to Dan's channel, as well as we had Deconverted Man in here earlier. B.S. Lewis stopped by, Skeptic Philosophy. I'm trying to think. It seemed like there's a couple other channels. I'll go back through and see who I've mentioned, because I try to promote everybody who's helping to promote this effort, to be honest with you. So Dan, I'm going to give you the stage here.
Okay, thank you very much. I thought we had a good discussion today. A lot of interesting and important topics came up. We got into politics a lot more than I was anticipating. We started out on ethics and covered a lot of territory, which I haven't covered in quite as much depth as I did here. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to present some new material. And I hope some people found it interesting and might want to check out Ayn Rand. There's a lot by her you can read online. You can also check out my channel. As I mentioned, I do a live stream. I probably do one in the next day or two. So I invite everyone to come by. And I see I picked up a couple of subscribers just during the course of this show. So thanks to those of you who have already subscribed. Thanks, Objective Ethics, for this opportunity. And I'm happy to do more. You mentioned free will as a possible topic we could talk more about, and I would definitely be up for that. So yeah, I think that's all I got right now. Thanks.
Well, I really appreciate Dr. Dan Norton for stopping by. I thought the conversation was outstanding. We touched on a lot of different topics, as he mentioned, and we did go more into politics than I even thought we would be. I'm really, as I mentioned before, I'm really ignorant about a lot of politics. And so it was educational for me, very informative, and it was really interesting as well. And I think there was an entertainment value to be had. Some people who came in and joined the open conversation, Dux, he always has some really, really deep insight to bring to conversations. I'm so glad that he's been stopping by. and checking out the channel. It was nice to see him actually last night. And I think about it, I think he actually stopped by as well in the open panel from the debate. It was great to see him. Chris, he always supports the channel. He's been here from the beginning, and I really appreciate his input. I know it could get frustrating because we do have some personal attachment sometimes to some of these issues. And so I respect the fact that, you know, maybe some of these conversations can get difficult. Messenger was here. Tilting Windmill, thank you so much for his support of the channel. He does a great job in the chat. And I know, again, I've seen the chat a few times. There's people are kind of duking it out a little bit verbally, but for the most part, from what I could track anyway, it was done very respectfully. And I really appreciate that. That's ultimately what I'm trying to promote here is respect. As a moral realist, I believe that every human being has equal value, and we need to treat each other the same way that we want people to treat us. It's reciprocity, right? And I think that's kind of just common sense. I think a lot of us know this inherently, and it just needs to be something that's more in the front of our minds, not so much in the back of our minds. And we need to extend this reciprocity to everyone equally, right? Not just our in-group. And I think if we did more of that, I think instantaneously the world would become a better place. And I know a lot of people talk to me and they say, you know, you're always so positive. Do you really think that the world can be any better? Because we see all this, we see all these problems in the world. There's so much suffering and there's so much division. And I honestly do think that we have the ability to make the world better. I mean, if we don't do it, it's not going to happen, right? AI is not going to do it for us. The machines aren't going to do it for us. They can certainly be a benefit to us, but at the end of the day, we are going to be responsible for our own behavior, our own decision-making, and how we work together as a collective. We are a social species. We live on one planet, at least right now. Okay. And that's probably going to be like that for the foreseeable future. We've got to take care of this planet. Collectively, we've got to take care of each other. And even if your motivation is selfish, you know, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. If you take care of your neighbor because you want your neighborhood to be nice, right? And you want your neighbors to take care of you reciprocally, then great. That's your motivation. I got no problem with that. As long as the behavior is that we are taking care of each other, building each other up. I think we talked about something that's very important, which is criminals, and how do we deal with criminals? Being sympathetic to the position that they're in, that puts them in a situation where they're committing crimes, lack of education, lack of resources, mental health. There's going to be a number of different problems, addiction, a number of different problems that cause people to commit crimes. And so if we really start focusing on the roots of these problems, I think we could do a lot to deter crime by taking out the root. I'm a real big proponent of that, is to look at the source of the problem and focus on that instead of fixing things after the fact and worrying about how we're going to deal with things after the fact. Let's look at the actual source. You know, I had a discussion about this again on my channel. There's a short that you guys could check out talking about changing minds, right? How are we going to change people's minds? Well, if you attack them directly, right, with the argument they're making directly, instead of looking at the source of the argument, why do people engage in cognitive dissonance? Where are their biases coming from? What's the root of their argument? If you could look at that and address that, you're going to be so much more effective at actually changing minds of people and getting them to see things the way that you want them to see things. And I think that if we use, as Ayn Rand would probably agree with, we use our reasoning to come to these conclusions, right? That's one of the things that I do agree with Ayn Rand, what I have read from her so far, is that this focus on we are reasoning agents, right? That's where she gets this view from, that we all share this view of the, you know, coercion and physical force. It mutes our ability, it limits our ability to reason and act reasonably. And I agree with that very much. I think that it's a fundamental principle we need to take advantage of. We have the ability, we're a unique animal, and that we have the ability for introspection. And because of that, we can attain, and we do strive for self-respect. And this is the key to living a good life and to our well-being, the freedom and well-being that I talk about. That well-being is living a good life. And we cannot live a good life if we're lacking any of the virtues. We cannot live a good life that we want to live if we don't have self-respect. So our behavior is paramount to that. I guess that's about enough preaching for now. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Just thank everybody. We'll get the links in the description after this video posts. And I look forward to seeing you guys next Sunday. We do an open panel every Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern. Please do join the conversation. I think next Sunday we do our failed prophecy series. It's the first Sunday of every month. So if I remember right, the calendar, I think next Sunday will be the first Sunday of February. Our featured guest is Johnny B. He's done a great job so far in that series. So definitely check that out. And until then, I will see this button here. Thank you so much.